A man reincarnates as Satoru Gojo in Chainsaw Man. What does this universe have in store for our MC, and how does he cope in an unknown world? Hello everyone. Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn in Chainsaw Man as Gojo Satoru, Part 1. If you enjoy this content, please smash the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. I hope you enjoy listening to it.
Within the deep expanse of the void, a flickering round orb of light could be seen floating in the deep darkness. The orb flickered like a gentle flame, illuminating the darkness that tried to devour it and persisting despite the dark storm. Where am I? After God knows how long, a deep voice reverberated from the orb, like that of a man accompanied by a groan. Where is this? The voice sounded out once more, but the chaotic void was completely silent, devoid of life, and no one answered him. What happened to me? The voice spoke once more, after which a pin-drop silence reigned for a moment. Did I die? The voice spoke once more, however this time, with less tenacity and volume, trying to make sense of the current circumstance. In the end, all that hard work, all for me just to lose my life to a bunch of bank robbers. The voice spoke once more, this time tinged with sorrow and regret. Emery Richards was raised by an orphanage in London. When he was 12 years old, the orphanage was closed down by the government due to abusive acts by the matrons and nuns who took care of the children. The government had offered to send them to other orphanages, but Emery refused and was left to wander the streets of Luton by himself. After a few weeks, he resorted to stealing and all sorts of crimes just to earn a few pounds for his daily bread. However, a year later, he stumbled upon a fighting gym, where he decided to get the shit beaten out of him in order to earn money. There, he learned how to fight, and this began his career as a mixed martial artist. Training and training and training till he collapsed, he swore to himself to be the absolute best. He learned many forms of martial arts: kickboxing, capoeira, jiu-jitsu, jeet kune do, taekwondo and many more. He trained day and night and was basically secluded from the outside world. While teenagers his age were in high school studying and having a good time with their friends, he locked himself up in the gym and kept punching and kicking till his knuckles were sore and his feet bled. He wasn't training because he loved it, nor because it was his passion, but rather, it was for the money. Poverty was an unpleasant situation to find yourself in, and he promised himself to never go back to the streets. After countless fights, broken bones and injuries, he was contracted by the UFC and soon went on to become the youngest lightweight in history. However, in a twist of fate, one day, he decided to go to the mall, to get himself a couple of nice clothes and shoes. After all, the least he deserved for all of his hard work was to look good. Unable to escape the shackles of destiny, the mall was robbed a few minutes after he had entered, and in an attempt to save a little girl from being raped by the thieves, he was brutally murdered, with multiple bullets ripping through his heart and lungs. No matter how hard and strong his fists were, they could never block a bullet, just like how an ordinary man was inconsequential in the grand scheme of destiny and fate. He went down as one of the greatest fighters to ever step in any ring, cementing his legacy, a legacy he would never be able to enjoy. What a tragic story. Suddenly, within the deep voice, a chuckle rang out, and an old man dressed like a Chinese hermit, with a figure as large as the universe itself, appeared. Immediately, the flickering orb of light was transformed into the figure of a young naked man, who levitated before the old man. Are you a god? Emery, after a few moments, opened his eyes and looked upon the divine figure before him in awe. Yes, I am. The old man responded with a calm smile, the light of goodness illuminating the entire expanse of the void. If you are real, why did I have to suffer? Why does anyone have to suffer? He spoke as he glared at the old man, as tears began streaming down his face. All those hellish days and nights of smashing his fists and heels against rocks and trees, all those days of fighting with the dogs for food, and getting wet in the rain due to having no shelter, it all came crashing down. Suffering and happiness are like two sides of a coin. To be able to truly experience one of them, you'll have to experience its counterpart first. The old man spoke, which made absolutely no sense to Emery. Destiny and fate are concepts of the universe that have been assigned the role of maintaining the balance between happiness and suffering and regulating life in the universe itself. You can blame your suffering on those two concepts. However, You could also say that it was due to destiny, or better still fate, that you and I could meet like this, the first interaction between the creator and his creation since the dawn of time. The old man spoke as Emery wiped his tears with his palms and furrowed his brows. As such, Emery Richards, since your fate has brought you to me, I will give you an opportunity like no other. The old man waved his hand, and a roulette appeared. Emery might have been secluded from the outside world physically, but at least during his years of blood and sweat, he had companions to keep him company, anime and novels. Now spin the roulette. You have 2 chances. You can spin to choose a new world to go to and spin again to choose appearance and abilities. The old man said as Emery stepped forward in the void, a bit dumbfounded. He knew exactly what was going to happen once he spun the roulette. He would most likely get isekai'd into another world. Taking a deep breath, he spun the roulette with all of his strength as he clenched his fists and held his breath. Dragon Ball Universe, Naruto, Jujutsu Kaisen, Marvel Cinematic Universe, and DC. He saw everything. However, fortunately and unfortunately, the pointer of the roulette landed on the Chainsaw Man universe. He had never really paid much attention to the anime, but at least it was better than nothing. Taking another deep breath, he spun the roulette once more as he saw the names and appearances of multiple characters. Goku, Vegeta, Madara Uchiha, and many more. However, the pointer landed on the image of a silver-haired man with beautiful ocean blue gem-like eyes that shone like stars. Immediately, Emery took a deep breath and wiped the sweat off his forehead. You have chosen, young one. I wish you happiness and contentment in a world out of the reach of destiny and fate themselves. I wish you all the best. The old man smiled and waved his hand, as a portal immediately swallowed Emery's body in an instant. Japan. On a small farmland at the outskirts of Kyoto, a desolated wasteland owned by the Yakuza, a figure stood before an old worn-out shack as he knocked furiously. Knock. Knock. The young figure had short blonde hair, wore an eye patch and a long brown overcoat, and held a small cute orange animal in his hand with a chainsaw in its head. Come on, man, open up. He roared as sweat dripped down his cheek and knocked even furiously. Creak. Soon, the door creaked open, as another young figure opened the door with an annoyed expression. The new figure was a silver-haired topless youth who wore a pair of dark glasses. He had a bored look on his face, and his skinny body was packed with lean muscle. What is it, Denji? He raised an eyebrow and looked at the young man before him and asked, Satoru. Satoru. Let me in. The Yakuza are coming for me. Please. He pleaded, as the silver-haired youth sighed and let him in before shutting the door. The moment he shut the door, a bunch of fierce-looking men with tattooed bodies came rushing towards the area. Do you think he went inside there? One man spoke as the one in the lead looked ahead at the old worn-out shack, and a hint of fear flashed in his eyes. Don't you know who lives there? The man in lead spoke and took a step back. He's even worse than the devils out there. Another person spoke. Let's go. We'll tell the boss he escaped. The leader said as they rushed into the woods where they came from. Woo. Thank you for letting me in here. Man. Those guys would have killed me. The blonde-haired youth with the eye patch said while wiping the beads of sweat from his forehead. Sigh. You can't keep running away from those people. Denji. Sooner or later, they're going to find you one day. I can't protect you forever. The silver-haired youth, Gojo Satoru, sighed and said, I know, man. Because of that, I've decided to become a devil hunter. Me and Pachita are going to hunt devils in order to earn money to pay those people off. Denji smiled enthusiastically. A devil hunter? With that weak strength of yours? You're only gonna put Pachita in harm. Come here, Pachita. He smiled and patted his lap as the soft furry ball leapt from Denji's arms into his lap, and he stroked it softly, causing it to release soft purrs. Come on, man. You didn't have to say that. I know you're strong and all, but I'm no weak slouch either. Denji smiled and paced around and began shadowboxing. You're hilarious, you know. Satoru chuckled. Both boys had been orphaned since a young age and had nothing but each other to rely on. Their friendship was deep and they saw each other as brothers. You know, instead of mulling around all day, Satoru, Why don't you help me out today, huh? The tomato demon has been causing havoc all over. If we can kill it, we can make a lot of cash to pay off some of the debts," he said energetically, as Satoru shook his head. "Come on, buddy. You gotta help me. I don't know if I would be able to take it down by myself," he begged, as Satoru finally sighed and agreed. "Fine. Let's go now." Denji smiled enthusiastically as Satoru shook his head and walked into a worn-out wardrobe and picked up a slightly dusty worn-out long-neck jacket and put it on. After that, he removed the glasses, revealing a pair of bluish gem-like eyes before he swiftly closed them, hissed in pain, picked up a long dark piece of cloth and wrapped it around his eyes, spiking his hair up. "You know, I still don't get why you wear this blindfold. I get that your eyes are weird and all that, but it's kinda creepy," Denji said. "Says the guy in the eye patch." Satoru laughed as Denji picked up Pachita and both of them walked out with laughs. "So that's him, hey." As the two youths walked out of the shack, several pairs of eyes hidden within the woods as the figure spying on them began to converse. "Yes, boss, that's him. He's the guy it's been searching for." One of the figures spoke in the darkness. "I can understand why it wants the silver-haired brat. There's that weird energy around him. But the other brat, there's nothing special about him." Another figure spoke with a deep and commanding voice. Meanwhile, Satoru, who was walking beside the non-stop chatterbox Denji, sighed inwardly. He had picked up the energy signature of multiple figures spying on them with the unique ability of his eyes, yet he chose to ignore them. "This world is even more dangerous than my previous one," he murmured to himself as Denji raised an eyebrow. Emery Richardson, the legendary UFC lightweight champion, had been reincarnated into the body of a young Gojo Satoru in this world. He had no parents in this world either and no family except Denji, whom he saved from a group of Yakuza when they were young, although he also got beat up in the process. Although he had the Limitless and 6 eyes, he had to learn every single technique from scratch. There was no experience nor memories nor anything to make references from. The knowledge of the Limitless, as well as other techniques from the Jujutsu Kaisen Gojo clan, was etched into his brain. Thankfully, cursed energy was abundant in this world due to the presence of the devils. Negative energy was probably the most abundant of all energy sources in this world. Hence, he did not need to worry. The only problem was he had no prior understanding of some of the techniques, especially Limitless. He was no physicist, and although the 6 eyes gave him the ability to see energy, mass and matter at the atomic level, learning it from scratch was a bit of a stretch for him. He had only mastered a few other techniques from the Gojo clan's arsenal, which he thought would at the very least give him an edge above ordinary people. "Oi, Satoru, what are you thinking about?" Denji asked, seeing Satoru getting all quiet. "It's nothing. Focus on the battle ahead." Satoru chuckled as both of them smiled and rushed to the location of the Tomato Devil. Japan. Outside a massive farm, a huge grotesque figure could be seen frolicking to and fro while making strange noises from its mouth. The figure was in the shape of a huge red tomato covered in eyes all over with a huge mouth and the arms of many humans as feet. Shush. Meanwhile, 2 figures were hiding a few meters away from the farm. There were 2 youths in hiding. The first youth was a silver-haired boy who wore a blindfold around his eyes, and the second one wore an eye patch over his left eye and held onto an orange furry creature with a chainsaw as its nose. "Oi, Satoru, how do we do this?" Denji whispered and looked at Satoru, who was busily examining the Tomato Devil. "I'll attack it head-on. Deal with it when its guard is down." Satoru smiled and walked out bravely. "Hey ugly!" he shouted out, and the Tomato Devil immediately spotted him with one of its disturbingly huge eyes. Shua. Making those weird noises this time with increased volume, it used one of its legs to hurl a tray full of tomatoes toward Satoru at fast speed. Meanwhile, Satoru was as fast as a cheetah. His body blasted forward at unnatural speeds before he leapt into the sky like an acrobat, effectively dodging the huge tray of tomatoes. He instantly coated his fist with immense amounts of cursed energy, twisted his body and descended before smashing his fist into the body of the Tomato Devil. Divergent fists. Boom! His fist instantly smashed into the head of the devil, creating a hole in its head from the sheer amount of force, and a second later, an immense amount of overwhelming energy spread through the body of the Tomato Devil, decimating its body from within. Blood splashed everywhere, and Satoru landed with a flip and a cocky smile. The tomato devil exploded with a bang, sending a small wave of blood and flesh all over. "Oi! Why didn't you let me kill it?" Denji suddenly appeared from behind with a slightly shocked and pseudo-angry expression. "How weak. I didn't know it was going to die in one punch." Satoru shrugged and shook his fist to wipe the blood off it. "Anyway, you can have it, Denji. It's all yours. You can sell it to pay off your debts." Satoru turned around and walked away while Denji smiled and began to harvest pieces of the corpse to sell. A few minutes later, Satoru reached his shack, before he took off his shirt and picked up a piece of stale bread and a jug of water, before sitting down on his favorite lazy chair and beginning to devour to his heart's content. If the divergent fist technique is enough to one-shot devils like the tomato devil, I wonder how strong I'll become when I muster the limitless. He thought as a small smile formed across his face. In his previous world, to stand at the top of the world, one needed to be rich, immensely rich. However, in this world, to stand at the top and to be able to protect oneself from the many and untold evils in this world, one needed to be strong. And Satoru decided that's exactly what he was going to do. After all, how was he going to live up to the legacy of the Honored One if he allowed himself to stay weak? Okay, in order to muster the limitless, he had to fully grasp the abilities of the Six Eyes. And that was exactly what he was going to do. Except he didn't know where to start from. From the anime, the Six Eyes granted the user unnatural perception, allowing the user to see energy and matter at atomic levels even at extremely long distances. He slowly removed the blindfold, revealing a pair of sparkling blue gem-like eyes. Suddenly, an immense headache reached his head as blood spurted out of his nose. The amount of information he received in just a split second was so overwhelming, it felt like the world had been placed onto his shoulders. Persevering through the pain, he suddenly felt the world slow down before his eyes, as his perception sped up drastically. In that one moment, over minutes worth of information had been processed by him, as he gritted his teeth and persevered. In the anime, Satoru Gojo had only been able to fully grasp the power of the Six Eyes by mustering reverse cursed techniques, but he, on the other hand, wasn't privileged to such an extent. He had to find other ways to muster the Six Eyes without the reverse cursed technique, or else he wasn't going to be able to use the limitless. After a few seconds, more and more blood burst out of his mouth, and in that moment, he could see minute particles of a certain wavelength of energy in the air. Not just that, every single object in his room had literally turned into atoms in his sight. Surprisingly enough, he beckoned to the atoms of the energy as it followed his command like a loyal soldier and entered his body. Soon, more and more atoms of the energy began to fill his body, as he erupted in a crazed smile. A radius of about 30 kilometers around him was fully visible to his eyes. He was like a god, feeling all energy within said radius completely under his control. After a few seconds, he forcefully shut his eyes and wiped the blood from his nose and mouth. A full 3 minutes. He sighed before he picked up a piece of cloth and wiped his nose and mouth. Without the reverse cursed technique, the only thing I can do now is to train my brain to be able to withstand the influx of information from the Six Eyes, or at least for a few minutes. He thought and clenched his fist, feeling the immense amounts of cursed energy flowing through his body. Before I start with the limitless, I should be able to learn Converging Fist and hopefully Black Flash. He smiled, picked up a white cloth, blindfolded his eyes, and walked out of the abandoned shack to train once again. Japan. A few weeks later, the midday sun shone brightly unobscured by clouds and sat majestically in the deep blue sky. A silver-haired shirtless youth stood before an old and worn-out shack, under the heat of the sun, with sweat glistening down his body. His piercing blue gem-like eyes were piercing and beautiful, and his breathing was hurried. After a few seconds of taking deep breaths, he got back into practicing various martial arts moves, with each punch and kick creating whooshing sounds in the air. After a few minutes of practicing, he sat down cross-legged on the ground and began meditating with his eyes closed. Examining him closely, one could see his body being covered by a thin sheath of a bluish flame, and his every breath caused the energy around him to pulsate. After a few moments, he stood up, walked to a small table a few meters from his body, picked up a towel and a pair of glasses and put the glasses on. He stretched his back lazily and walked into his shack to take a bath. After a few weeks of hard work and training, he could boldly say that he had mastered the basics of jujitsu sorcery. Now, it was time to move on to even more advanced cursed techniques. It was time to move on to the limitless. Holding a bucket of water, Satoru walked into the inner part of the shack for a bath. Pouring cold water on his body, he shuddered for a moment and smiled. Just the thought of becoming some kind of a lord over space through the limitless is making me restless, he thought, as a smile formed on his face. The probabilities of the limitless paired with the 6 eyes were endless. In Jujutsu Kaisen, the ancestors of the Gojo clan were only able to base the limitless on 4 aspects of spatiokinesis. Dividing space infinitely, which they call infinity. Pulling infinite layers of space into one another, which they call lapse blue. Pushing apart space, which they call red, and erasing a point in space, which they call purple. In other words, the limitless simply allowed the user to divide, pull, push, and erase space at will. However, the possibilities were endless in Satoru's opinion. Apart from these 4 aspects, he wondered if the limitless could allow for other forms of spatiokinesis, such as manipulation of void energy. After taking his bath, he quickly wiped himself and lay on his bed. Speaking of which, it's been a while since I last saw Denji and Pachita. Wonder how they're doing. He spoke to himself, and after a few minutes of thinking, he fell into a deep slumber. It's all right, Pachita. After this, all our debts with the Yakuza will be settled. We can save enough money to buy nice things for ourselves and Satoru. Sitting on the back seat of a small car, a shirtless Denji gently rubbed Pachita's fur and murmured to himself, "Here we are." After a few minutes, the driver parked the car in front of an abandoned warehouse and walked out, revealing his figure, a short middle-aged man wearing a brown overcoat and a hat. "This is the place, Denji. Let me take you inside." He was led by the man and entered the abandoned warehouse with Pachita in his arms and readied for battle. However, after a few minutes of walking, he saw nothing around and couldn't help but ask, "Hey boss. We've been walking for quite some time. I don't see signs of any devil. Are you sure this is the place? Be patient and follow me, Denji. I can assure you, this is the place." The man said and continued walking. But after walking a few more meters, he stopped suddenly, with his head hung low, and remained silent. Seeing this weird behavior, Denji couldn't help but take a step back unconsciously, while Pachita made angry noises. Meanwhile, back at the abandoned shack, 6 men stood in front of the shack, with the one in the lead being a young man with short dark hair and a sinister smile on his face. What a disgusting piece of shit house. How could the person the Lord is so interested in live in such a place? The short-haired man spat out in annoyance. "Go in and drag him out. I want him sprawled at my feet in a minute." He spoke impatiently, and the other 5 men nodded, armed with steel pipes and knives. They were about to break into the shack when Satoru walked out with a cocky smile. He was dressed in his long neck sweater and his eyes were tied with a white blindfold, spiking his hair up. His hands were in his pockets, and he had a condescending look on his face. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he spoke, glancing at the short-haired man who held his sinister smile. "So you did notice us after all. However, it doesn't matter, because tonight you and your friend will become food for our lord, the zombie devil," he said, and glanced at Satoru, whose facial expression hadn't changed the slightest despite the hint. "So they've got Denji? I guess I'll have to wrap things up real quick," Satoru said, and took a step forward while cracking up his knuckles. Seeing as his men were still standing there as their enemy advanced towards them, the short-haired man roared out in anger, "You idiots! This is the part where you attack him." Hearing their boss speak, they rushed out toward Satoru with raised weapons. Chuckling, Satoru blasted out with impressive speed, reached the first man in the blink of an eye and executed a flying kick. His feet smashed into the head of the guy, literally kicking the man's head off his shoulders, as blood spurted all over, painting a gory scene. "You fools! Use your real forms!" The man roared out, as the remaining men nodded, and immediately, their skin began turning gray and they rushed toward him with bloodthirsty looks. "I see. You guys have formed contracts with the zombie devil. The good news is I'm in a bit of a hurry. The bad news is I hate zombies." Satoru picked up the blade from the hand of the first man who had died first and rushed towards the opponents at fast speeds. Switching to reverse grip, he leapt into the air, spun around and slashed the blade forward, coated in a sheath of cursed energy. Like a hot knife through butter, the knife went right through the body of the first zombie as blood spurted from his corpse. Without wasting any moment, he rushed towards the second, clenched his fist and smashed it out. The zombie was blasted into a bloody mist as blood rained down. Rushing towards the third, he switched his blade to his right hand and began to execute a set of extremely advanced blade techniques, weaving and slashing like an advanced samurai. The next moment, he came to a stop behind all the zombie men, as their disembodied and decapitated bodies collapsed to the ground, spraying blood all over. You? Oh. You better start talking. Where have they taken Denji? Satoru walked towards him calmly. You think I'll tell you? The dark-haired young man roared out before his body transformed into a larger and more muscular zombie. Without wasting any more time, Satoru rushed forward and threw a punch forward. Bang! The zombie also sent its fists hurling forward, but at the point of impact, it was sent flying several meters. With the ability of the six eyes, he had nigh-perfect control over his cursed energy, to the extent that he was sure he could say he would never run out of energy again. Without relenting, he rushed forward at fast speeds, reached the zombie, and smashed his fist forward with all of his strength. Black flash. His fists were accompanied by a surge of red and black lightning, and an overwhelming force blasted apart the body of the demon, causing it to explode with a rain of blood. Raising his head, Satoru blasted away at great speeds due north, leaving behind a small crater where he previously stood. Japan. Deep in the night, in an old and abandoned warehouse, the sounds of multiple footsteps could be heard in a hurry. Inside the warehouse, a youth with short blonde hair and an eye patch was currently running from multiple figures in the dark warehouse. Looking closely, one could see a huge gash on his chest that was constantly dripping with blood. Together with the blood dripping from his mouth and nose, he cut a sorry figure. Even the orange furry creature in his hands had a huge gash in its back and was bleeding profusely. Looking back at his pursuers, his breathing was hurried, and his face was drenched in horror. The next moment, he tripped and fell onto the ground as he rolled to a meter away. He began crawling, with more and more blood pouring out of his mouth. Suddenly, he felt a sharp object rip through his back as he roared out in pain. He turned around only to see what looked like a zombified human sticking a large knife into his back. He then saw multiple zombies rushing towards him with weapons, as they dived onto his body and pierced him with the sharp weapons. Somebody help. Anyone. Satoru. Help. Roaring out in pain, he called out with blood pouring out his nose and mouth. His face was twisted to a horrifying degree, and his body was ripped apart by the zombies. Even the cute creature still in his arms was not spared from the onslaught. Schlick. Schlick. After a few seconds, only the sounds of flesh being ripped apart could be heard, accompanied by the continuous drip of drops of blood. Ha 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 ha. Suddenly, hysterical laughter reverberated as an extremely grotesque creature appeared in a burst of devilish energy. The figure looked like the neck and torso of a gigantic man, with a disgusting face etched into its left chest. Multiple tentacles could be seen whipping back and forth as it moved forward slowly. All devil hunters deserve to be killed in such a manner. Dispose of the body. Its voice sounded like the voice of many children as it turned around and left. Meanwhile, a silver-haired figure was running like a fierce gale along a highway. His body bypassed many cars and trucks, and his eyebrows were furrowed deeply. Rushing forward at full speed, he leapt into the sky and landed on top of a truck, before he bolted atop the ceiling of the truck, jumped onto another car and blasted away. After a few minutes, he jumped from the top of a small car and landed onto an untarred road, where he began looking around him. Sighing, he took off his piece of cloth wrapped around his eyes and examined his surroundings. The negative energy is extremely thick. The zombie devil should be here. Satoru bolted forward at full speed. Using his six eyes as a navigator, he was faster than a horse, and his body seemed to traverse long distances in a step. After a few minutes of non-stop running, he stopped in front of an abandoned warehouse, where the negative energy was extremely concentrated. Slowly and steadily, he made his way into the warehouse like an assassin. There's blood. Right when he got to the entrance of the warehouse, the strong scent of blood assaulted his nose, as a shocked expression appeared on his face. The next moment, he bolted into the warehouse at full speed, as when he entered, what he saw made even him, who had fought so many fights and was used to blood in his previous life, sick to the stomach. There were an uncountable number of zombies, and they all were attacking a figure with a robotic head and a chainsaw on his forehead. His arms were morphed into a chainsaw, which was soiled with blood. The moment Satoru entered, the six eyes were solely fixated on the chainsaw demon, as a bead of sweat dripped down his forehead. The information from the six eyes was that the figure in front of him was no longer human, but his emotion said otherwise. The blooded shirt, the pair of worn-out trousers and the shoes he himself had bought were being worn by the figure. At that moment, his heart seemed to fall apart, seeing his best friend and brother figure turned into a malicious demon by unknown means. Denji! Satoru called out, attracting the attention of the chainsaw demon, the zombies, and the zombie demon, which now had a massive gash on its forehead. The moment the chainsaw demon turned around, Satoru could see the malicious glow in its robotic head increase sharply as it shot towards him with outstretched arms. You're the one with the energy. As long as I devour you, I will become even stronger. The zombie devil roared murderously as it shot towards Satoru as well, together with all of the demons. Immediately, he was besieged from all sides. The chainsaw demon on his left, the zombie devil in the middle, and the zombie army on his right. Without further ado, his eyes glowed murderously as he bolted forward, grabbed a long blade on the ground and shot towards the zombie demon and his army. At that moment, his immense cursed energy was overflowing, accompanied by immense rage and ferocity. The zombie army overtook the zombie demon, and bolted towards him. Satoru leapt into the air and descended with an overhead slash. Boom! Immediately, a massive shockwave erupted, along with a fierce gale, before every zombie stopped abruptly as Satoru landed on the ground. Soon jets of blood spurted out as their decapitated torsos fell to the ground, drowning the place in blood. What? The zombie devil looked on, seeing one of its tentacles cleanly cut off. A painful roar reverberated across the warehouse. Satoru didn't even waste a breath as he caught sight of the chainsaw demon rapidly gaining on his position. He bolted forward with his blade in reverse grip and maliciously leapt into the sky, spinners around and executed a reverse spinning slash, accompanied by perfect cursed energy output. Black flash. Boom! The walls of the warehouse shook from an immense shockwave as a fierce gale erupted, causing dust to swirl. When the dust settled, a huge gash had been formed on the ground as tendrils of black and red lightning smothered near the massive gash. The body of the zombie demon had been cleanly bisected into two, as the red and black lightning streaked across both parts of the body. Why you? How are you so strong? The grotesque face of the zombie demon twisted to a terrifying degree, as horror and shock could be seen in its eyes. Meanwhile, Satoru landed on the ground, like a ninja, drenched in blood, as the long blade in his hand shattered at once. However, the next second, his body sidestepped to the left and shot backwards, dodging a slash from the chainsaw demon's long arms, like he had a pair of eyes at the back of his head. Oi! Denji! It's me. Satoru, Gojo Satoru. Satoru landed on the ground and spoke to the chainsaw demon, who was now face to face with him. Satoru. The chainsaw demon opened its mouth and spoke, as the murderous glow dimmed significantly. Yes. It's me, Satoru. Satoru nodded as the six eyes intensely examined Denji's body. Because of why you. Peepo Cheetah and ID died. Why you were supposed to protect us. Denji roared out as the malicious glow in his eyes glowed. The next moment, he shot towards Satoru and appeared before him in a flash, before slashing his chainsaws towards his best friend's neck. The chainsaw devil bolted towards Satoru and slashed his chainsaws towards his best friend's neck. Right when the chainsaw was about to slash into his neck, his perception sped up as reality itself began to slow considerably, courtesy of the six eyes. Immediately he sidestepped to the right, causing the slash to miss him by a centimeter. Harg! Denji roared out in anger and began to execute consecutive slashes with his chainsaws, as multiple whooshing sounds reverberated, akin to the sound of air being slashed. Satoru on the other hand kept calm and moved his body, as if he was taking a walk in the park. All the slashes were close to his body, but never close enough to really touch him. After dodging Denji's attacks, Satoru bolted and appeared right before Denji in a split second, placed his palm on his chest, and jerked it forward. Boom! Denji was hurled backwards after a burst of cursed energy before he smashed into a pillar. Arg! Before Satoru could catch his breath, the Chainsaw Devil's figure was already in the air, descending towards him with an overhead slash. He instantly flipped backwards, effectively dodging the attack, and without wasting any time, he bolted forward, reached the Chainsaw Devil in a split second, and executed a crazy left hook, right body punch and spinning back kick, which hurled Denji flying into the walls once more. Do I really have to kill him? Satoru thought with a frown, seeing Denji rushing towards him once more. It was like the Chainsaw Devil had infinite stamina and kept coming even though he was taking a lot of damage. I think I should knock him out? That will do for now. Satoru dodged Denji's slashes while still in deep thought, as if he were on a stroll. The six eyes not only provided 360 vision and subatomic levels of perception of mass and energy, but also increased peripheral perception, allowing the user to enter some sort of bullet time whenever in use. This alone, if properly used, could grant nigh godly reaction time and reflexes, allowing the user to be almost invincible in close combat. However, just as Satoru was about to move, a nerve-wracking headache assaulted him as blood spurted out of his nose, which made him stagger for a second. Seeing the slip-up, Denji rushed forward and slashed a chainsaw forward. Satoru's brain was in a wobbly state, with its ability to process information currently in a bit of a mess. Even after torturing himself to withstand the six eyes for a while, he ultimately couldn't use it indefinitely without the reverse cursed technique. He was hurled backwards like a comet, a testament to the immense strength of the Chainsaw Devil. His body dropped to the ground as he puked out blood and gritted his teeth in pain. A huge gash had appeared from his collarbone to his abdomen, as blood poured out uncontrollably. Staggering to his feet, he closed his eyes abruptly, feeling the headache growing with each passing second. Taking advantage of Satoru's current state, Denji rushed forward, appeared before him and slashed his blade towards him again. Even with his eyes closed, Satoru could ultimately perceive his surroundings, as he sidestepped, turned around and executed a spinning kick, which hurled Denji backwards a few meters. I'm losing too much blood. I have to end this quick. Satoru thought for a moment, feeling the immense amount of pain in his chest. The next moment he rushed out, at full speed, leapt into the air and descended with a spin before throwing a punch forward with all the amount of force he could currently muster, his fists coated in red and black lightning. Black flash. In a split second, his fists were right before Denji's robotic face, but right when the fist was about to smash into him, he vanished with a step, causing Satoru's attack to miss him. How? Before Satoru could even realize, he felt a sharp pain within his abdomen, as blood spurted out of his mouth immediately. He looked down only to see a long chainsaw embedded in his abdomen, and Denji's robotic face glaring at him with a malicious glow in his eyes. With a roar, Denji yanked the chainsaw out of his body before he executed a front kick, which hurled Satoru backwards like a comet, sending him smashing through multiple pillars. How did he do that? Satoru's mind was currently in turmoil. With his current mastery of the Six Eyes ability, the bullet time ability couldn't be used passively and could only be used for as long as he could keep his eyes open. But even with the eyes closed, his peripheral perception far surpassed that of an ordinary person, and even with that, he hadn't seen Denji's movements at all. Rising to his feet, he wiped his mouth as he spotted the chainsaw man rushing towards him. Before he could even move, Denji appeared before him, executing that same movement that even he had not been able to catch wind of. Schlick. Schlick. The sound of flesh being ripped apart reverberated, followed by the sound of blood dripping to the ground. At this point, the sun had started to rise as a group of figures walked towards the warehouse dressed in black suits and overcoats. Meanwhile, Denji and Satoru currently stood a few meters apart, with Denji's chainsaws and body soiled with blood and Satoru having a surprised expression on his face. Multiple deep gashes could be seen around his body, as blood flowed out incessantly. Blood spurted out of his mouth the next moment as he dropped to his knees. Die! Denji rushed out and leapt into the skies, bringing down his chainsaws with immense force onto his best friend. Despair and regret could be seen on Satoru's face as he witnessed the chainsaw getting closer to his neck with every passing second. He knew that no matter what, once the chainsaws reached his throat, he was done for. No. I can't die. Not yet. He had been granted a 1 in a million chance to be reincarnated, and now he was going to die immaturely. Deep down within him, he just couldn't accept this fate. He knew there was only a single thing that could save him at this moment, but after many tries during practice, he still hadn't shown signs of learning the technique. However, this wasn't practice anymore. He had to manifest the technique or he would really lose his life in a few seconds. Taking a deep breath, his eyes fluttered open once more as an untold amount of cursed energy began to flood his body. Space was everywhere, a three-dimensional void within which matter and energy resided. The limitless could allow him to manipulate this dimensional void to untold extents, allowing him to divide, pull, push and erase this void at will. The next second, the cursed energy within his body began to react with the space around him as it began to wriggle and wobble around him. 4 figures had walked into the warehouse at this point and were witnessing the showdown between the 2 best friends. The one in lead was a beautiful young woman with long pink hair and unusual golden eyes with red circles in the middle. Although her focus was mostly on the chainsaw devil, she couldn't help but notice the unusual phenomenon occurring around the youth with short silver hair, who was on the verge of death. The space around him seemed to wriggle and stretch, as if welcoming the presence of the god of dimensions. Denji's chainsaw appeared before Satoru's neck in the blink of an eye, and right when I was about to pierce into his body, ending his life for good, it stopped a few centimeters away from his skin, unable to move an inch closer. I did it. Satoru flashed a victorious smile, seeing the blade an inch before his throat, unable to move closer. He had finally stepped on the path to become the strongest, the honored one. He had finally manifested the first stage of the limitless itself, neutrality, the ability to divide space an infinite number of times at will. It all makes sense now, he said with his smile, as blood flowed out of his mouth and nose, and the next second, his body crashed to the ground, losing consciousness, as blood pooled under him. Seeing his enemy down already, Denji raised his chainsaws, ready to rip apart his chainsaws when he noticed the pink-haired young woman walking towards him. Immediately and unconsciously, he lowered his chainsaws as the malicious glow in his eyes died down before reverting to his normal form. He looked around, as memories flashed past his thoughts, and saw his best friend lying on the ground in a pool of blood with deep gashes all over his body. Immediately, tears flowed down his cheeks uncontrollably as he knelt near his friend's body and cried out, Please save him." Denji instantly transformed back to his human form as he knelt beside the body of his best friend, tears dripping down his cheeks uncontrollably as he pleaded with the pink-haired young woman. The pink-haired woman nodded with a dull expression, her eyes darting between Denji and Satoru. "Who is he to you?" she asked and walked to Satoru and examined his pulse. "He's my friend, no, my brother." Denji roared out, as the pink-haired young woman raised an eyebrow. "He will be all right," she said, and took her hands off Satoru's neck. "Did you kill all the zombies?" She looked at him and asked. "No. It was him," Denji replied, his heart rate decreasing exponentially just from hearing that Satoru would be all right. Interesting." She nodded. "All right, take him away, and you come with me." She immediately signaled to the 2 men behind her, who carried Satoru's unconscious body and took him away in a car. "What's your name?" she asked with a small smile. Denji." The youth couldn't help but stammer, with his face flushed, seeing such a beautiful smile. "I can see you're a human, Denji. I came here to kill the zombie devil. I'm a devil hunter from the Public Safety Bureau." She leaned in and whispered, "Since you killed the zombie devil, then my work here is done. As for you, Denji, you can choose to become a devil that I kill or become my human pet. Know that I feed my pets really well." She whispered once more, however, a subtle murderous light flashed within her eyes. "I didn't kill the zombie devil. Satoru did. And, what's for breakfast?" Denji scratched his head and spoke with a silly smile. "Oh? How interesting." She raised an eyebrow and said with a laugh, "Anyway, for breakfast, I think bread, peanut butter, and jelly should be on the menu. What do you think?" She smiled and said, as Denji felt his mouth water. A few days later, within a room in a large facility, a young man lay on a bed with a peaceful expression. His eyes were tightly shut, as his silvery white hair was sprawled over the pillow. You! With a groan, his eyes fluttered open, revealing a pair of beautiful azure eyes that shine like gems. He sat up after a moment and rubbed his forehead with a sigh, feeling the mild migraine. Where am I? Seeing the unfamiliar environment, he curiously looked around before he spotted some clothes neatly folded over a small table, as well as a white piece of cloth. He walked out of the bed, and the moment he stood on his feet, he couldn't help but lazily stretch his waist before he quickly examined his body for any damage or scars. Do they have reverse cursed technique in this world? Seeing his body scarless and back to its optimum state, he clicked his tongue and smiled before he proceeded to put on the grey sweatpants and the black shirt. He then picked up the white piece of cloth, closed his eyes and blindfolded them, completely covering the upper part of his face, while his hair shot up like spikes. You're awake, just like she said. Suddenly, he sensed a presence in the room. As he slowly turned around, he saw a youth in a black suit, with a sword sheathed at his back like a ninja. His slightly long dark hair was tied into a bun, and his apathetic eyes revealed no emotion. And who are you? Satoru asked as he folded his arms. Hayakawa Oki, Devil Hunter, Public Safety Bureau. He stated, as his eyes subtly examined Satoru's body. Satoru. GOJO SATORU. Satoru introduced himself shortly. A governmental organization. Satoru asked as Oki ignored him and began to make the bed. He finished in the blink of an eye and walked to the door. Come with me. Ms. Makima would like to have a word with you. He opened the door and walked out as Satoru looked at him weirdly. If his blindfold was off, then his current facial expression with both of his eyebrows raised would have been visible. He began to wonder if the youth before him was a robot, as he followed him silently. Soon, they reached a door, as he opened it and gestured for Satoru to enter. Upon entering, he saw a pink-haired woman looking into the distant sky through her window, standing near a desk filled with lots of papers. He scanned the room once or twice as his gaze landed on the back of the pink-haired woman. After a moment, she turned around and walked closer to him, her golden eyes peering deep into his soul. At that moment, as if sensing a challenge, the 6 eyes fluttered open under Satoru's blindfold as he scanned her from head to toe before raising a brow in surprise. I see, how interesting. She broke eye contact and walked to her desk. You're not a devil, yet your body naturally and directly produces negative energy. No wonder the zombie devil wanted to eat you. I wonder how many devils would be able to keep their hands off you if they sensed you. She spoke, with a slight smile, as Satoru sat on a chair and crossed his legs. His expression was relaxed, and a calm, even playful smile appeared on his face. What's interesting is a devil being the head of the Public Safety Bureau and leader of the Devil Hunters, he said, while looking at the glass tag on her table and seeing her name and accolades. Immediately after his words sounded out, the atmosphere turned chilly the next moment, as she raised an eyebrow in surprise due to his words. Enough with the games. What do you want from me? Satoru leaned in fearlessly and asked with his playful expression replaced by an utterly serious one. I've taken an interest in you and your abilities. She spoke, looking condescendingly at him. Fut. Ha ha ha. Satoru erupted in a fit of laughter before he gestured for her to continue. You have 2 choices before you, Gojo Satoru. For the first choice, I can assume you're a devil because you're producing negative energy and execute you right here, or you can become my pet. She said with a small smile while keeping her eyes still on him. Oh really? Satoru's smile never left his face. He was still as relaxed as ever before he opened his mouth and uttered. I guess I'm going to have to refuse your offer, sorry. He stood up and faced off with her. Hearing his answer, a murderous light flashed in her eyes, before she extended her finger forward, like a gun and pointed it at him. Satoru only smiled, removed his blindfold, and performed a hand seal, while space seemed to wobble with every flare of his cursed energy. Both of their eyes glared into each other as the tension between them began to create flaming sparks in the air. Satoru! Suddenly, a figure immediately rushed into the room and rushed towards Satoru, who immediately deactivated his cursed technique and embraced the figure who had rushed into his arms. You're fine. Denji, who had just burst into the room, embraced Satoru tighter, a relieved smile appearing on his face. "Oh, sorry. Was I interrupting something?" he asked, while his eyes suspiciously darted between Satoru and Makima. "We'll continue this conversation later. But for now, you should join the Devil Hunters Association, as your abilities would be of use to us," she said and walked to her seat. Fine. But I'll become a devil hunter. But my services won't be for free, you know. I'm quite exceptional," Satoru said with a cocky smile, as Makima's apathetic eyes rested on him once more. "I'll take that as a yes." He shrugged and walked out with Denji, not forgetting to wink at Makima before leaving. Tokyo, Japan. Public Safety Division. A small black van pulled up in front of a tall building as a couple of figures walked out. Whoa. Very nice. One of the figures, a youth in a white blindfold with silver hair dressed in a casual black shirt and grey sweatpants, smiled upon seeing the huge building before him. Cool, right? Wait till you see the inside. By his side were two youths, one of whom wore a white shirt with folded sleeves, black pants, and a black tie with blonde hair. He playfully elbowed the silver-haired youth and said, while the black-haired youth in a suit beside them rolled his eyes. The three of them entered the building as the blonde-haired youth showed the silver-haired youth around, as both of them laughed around. Ding! Soon the three youths walked out of an elevator, reaching the top floor of the building, which was a hostel for state devil hunters. After walking for a bit, they reached a room, B03, after which Oki, the black-haired youth, took out a pair of keys from his pockets and opened the door. "This is your room, Satoru." He stood at the door while Satoru and Denji entered the room and examined the place. "Wow, this place is awesome," Satoru chipped in, seeing the neatly arranged room. It was a room that contained a single hall, a bedroom, a kitchen, and a training room. "Wow, man, I'll get my stuff. We can be roommates at last." Denji rushed out with joy but was stopped by Oki. "What? Ms. Makima ordered you to stay with me. And inasmuch as I hate the idea of it, you're stuck with me." Oki looked Denji in the eye and said as his smile dropped immediately. "Anyway, Satoru, under Ms. Makima's orders, you are to join Special Division 4 under my orders." Oki spoke and walked to Satoru, who was currently comfortably seated on a nice couch. "Under your orders? I don't think so. I'm more of a lone wolf type of person, and I don't think we would get along," Satoru said with a cocky smile, as Oki gritted his teeth and clenched his fist. "Anyway, thanks for showing me to my room. I'll see you when it's time for the mission." Satoru spoke and lay down to rest. "Anyway, I can't accompany you today, Satoru. Oki and I have a mission with Ms. Makima. See you soon," Denji said and walked out with Oki, leaving Satoru in the room to rest. "Okay. It's time to take a bath." Satoru stood up, took off his shirt, and walked to the bathroom. "A bathtub? Hell yeah." He immediately filled it with water and soap, took off his pants and jumped into the tub as he heaved a sigh of relief. A few minutes after soaking in the tub, he walked to the shower, washed down and dried himself with a towel. After a moment, he wrapped a towel around his waist and walked out while humming a song. He went to the bedroom and opened his wardrobe only to click his tongue upon seeing the clothes inside. White shirts, ties, blazers, overcoats, and pants. He also saw a few pairs of shoes neatly arranged in a drawer. Suits aren't really my thing though. He sighed, picked up black pants, and put them on before searching until he found a long-necked black leather sweater with side pockets. He then smiled and set it aside before he picked up a white round-neck shirt, put it on and walked out to the hall. Seeing the fridge, he paused, walked to it and opened it before a smile formed on his face. He immediately picked out a can of soda and some chips before he walked to the couch, sat and relaxed as he ate to his heart's content. These people really know how to furnish a room. He took a sip of the soda as he sighed dramatically and relished the taste. He relaxed for a while and ate, but right after, he walked into the training room, which was filled with sets of gym equipment, punching bags, and a specialized area for practicing techniques and martial arts. He walked to the specialized area and sat down cross-legged. "Okay. Now that I've finally connected with the Limitless, it's time to make some progress," he smiled and said. Although he had been a fan of anime, he didn't really know much about Jujutsu Kaisen since it was released a few months before his championship match, after which he died in his previous world. But even so, he knew of some characters in the anime, like Gojo Satoru. After all, overpowered senseis like Gojo, Whis from the Dragon Ball universe and others were his favorites. Gojo's abilities with the Limitless had been defined and divided into Infinity, Blue, Red and Purple, but he knew he could do more than that. Closing his eyes, he materialized Infinity with a hand seal as he focused on trying to form an infinity around a small bag lying on a nearby table. Space was everywhere, and if he could manifest an infinity around his body, he could definitely manifest it in another point in space. However, after a few moments, nothing seemed to happen, as he sighed in frustration. Refusing to give up, he continued the process, trying to manifest infinity or, better still, use cursed energy to manipulate the spatial forces surrounding the objects in his room, yet he failed even after trying for long hours. What is the issue? Why am I failing? After a while he stopped, lied down and thought to himself. Hold on. The key to manipulating spatial forces should be… come on. After an idea lit up in his head, he touched his face only to realize that his eyes were closed and blindfolded. Who could blame him? It was kind of weird when you could still see normally even after your eyes were blindfolded. He instantly removed the blindfold and opened the 6 eyes, as his view of the world changed. At that moment, he could see the atoms of spatial energies, like small blue fireflies occupying what looked like a dimensional void of existence. It looked magical and beautiful to him. With his eyes still opened, he channeled the power of the neutral version of the Limitless, the Infinity, as he saw the atoms of space divide themselves into an infinite number around his body. Smiling, he flared his cursed energy and used the 6 eyes, cursed energy, and Limitless to begin to manipulate spatial forces around the small bag he tried to lift previously. The next moment, the bag began to levitate, as a smile formed on his face. He continued to manipulate the spatial forces to move the bag up, down, and sideways. He then used more cursed energy to allow the bag to shoot towards him like a bullet. But the moment it reached him, he formed a hand seal, as infinity materialized before him and stopped the bag. Yes. He laughed in joy and ecstasy, seeing as he was making progress. No wonder it was said that without the 6 eyes, the Limitless was unable to be mastered. It's basically like a catalyst which helps you to communicate with spatial forces via cursed energy. He thought as he calmed himself. He was going to continue practicing, from the smaller objects to the larger ones. Within a huge temple that resembled a court in one way or another, several figures could be seen seated in front of a desk, while another figure stood before them. The figure standing before them was a beautiful woman dressed in black pants and a white shirt with pink hair. Her hands were folded behind her, as she listened attentively to the words of the figures seated at the high table like some sort of jury. The American issue has got the Soviet war hawks crowing even louder than usual. The first figure seated at the table, a middle-aged man dressed in a suit and glasses, spoke with an evil sneer on his face. There have been rumors of military use of devils as well. He finished his statement and adjusted his glasses. Hopefully, devils will stay as Japan's only enemies in the future. Another man by his side said with a sigh, Makima, how have the hunting dogs who have been added to the squad been performing? A new figure spoke as Makima raised her head. One is promising, the other interesting and another unpredictable. She said swiftly. Unpredictable. The figures at the high table looked at each other in dismay. Gojo Satoru. He is neither devil nor a fiend, yet his body naturally produces negative energy like devils do. Makima spoke as the figures listened attentively. Also, the sheer output of negative energy from his body is unlike anything I've ever seen before, and most importantly, he seems to be able to manipulate space to an extent. She finished her statement as the figures finished taking notes on pieces of paper before them. Makima, your job is to grow the hounds and then put them to work. Any hound outside of your control should be directly eliminated in order not to pose future problems. Another middle-aged man seated in the middle said with raised eyebrows. His abilities are too useful to us to be discarded so easily. He might not be under my control now, but he will not be able to escape his fate. She said with a smile, as the figures nodded. Oi, power. Are you sure this is the place? Walking towards an abandoned shack, Denji, who was holding an axe on his shoulder, asked the figure walking beside him with an annoyed expression. "Just shut up and come along, you idiot. We're almost there." A young girl with long blonde hair wearing a shirt with a tie, black pants, and white boots responded with a fierce glare. Her most notable feature was the blood-red pair of horns that was growing in the middle of her head. "I can't get near the Bat Devil, or it'll sense my presence." Suddenly, Denji stopped, remembering what she had told him a while ago in the train, as the grip on his axe tightened. Without hesitation, he swung it towards his partner, the young girl. However, before his axe could even reach her, a blood-red hammer smashed into his head with a powerful force, knocking him out cold with a bleeding skull, after which she dragged him to the warehouse. Devil Hunters HQ. Within a training room, a shirtless youth with bandaged knuckles was furiously smashing his fists and legs into a punching bag before him. His body glistened with sweat as he unleashed multiple combos on the punching bag, which seemed to fold with every punch and kick. After a while, he stopped and took a deep breath, before he picked up a towel nearby and wiped himself, before taking a seat on the floor. Right after making substantial progress with the Limitless, Satoru had devoted almost all his time to an intense training schedule. After a few days of this crazy schedule, although he had not made another breakthrough in the main abilities of the Limitless, he had managed to at least strengthen his previous ones and their applications. Even more importantly, he could feel his body's strength increase dramatically with every training session, as well as his cursed energy reserves. After taking a couple of breaths, he lifted up one end of his blindfold, revealing a sparkling blue eye, before he beckoned with his finger. The next second, a small pebble began to levitate and spin as it moved closer to him until it was about eye level. Boom! With a slight move of his eyebrows, the pebble shot forward at immense speed, like a bullet, and instantly penetrated a wall in his room, as massive cracks formed on the wall. With a laugh, his cursed energy flared once more, and soon, his body began to levitate in the air. Although he hadn't mastered actually flying yet, he had figured he could harden spatial molecules to a level where they could support his body weight, and so he did. Gently, he lowered his body to the ground and sat down once more. Buzz! Suddenly beside him, his phone began to buzz as he picked it up and placed it on his left ear. What? Suddenly his eyes widened in shock as he rushed out at full speed, distress and urgency etched all over his face. Meanwhile, back at the warehouse, the morning sun had already set, with beautiful sun rays cascading down with blessings and goodness. Boom! The next second, the huge warehouse collapsed as a figure was hurled like a rocket, his body smashing into multiple buildings, as the civilians roared in horror and began to run for their lives. Just as the civilians were trying their very best to escape, a massive suction force erupted, as most of them were pulled backwards by a strange force. The next second, a huge purple tentacle with the head of a leech burst out of the warehouse, swallowing all the civilians like a vacuum. Ha 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 ha. Human flesh tastes the best when it's seasoned with fear. Shrill laughter reverberated as a huge purple creature walked out. The creature had a large body with long and huge tentacles with mouths like leeches. Its neck was long and the black hair on its head covered its eyes as a huge mouth filled with sharp teeth revealed a smile. Here. Have some snacks, my Batsy. It pushed its tentacles into the mouth of another creature beside it, as humans were swallowed and chewed like food. The second creature was a massive bat with a huge wingspan. Ah! Suddenly, a figure walked out from the collapsed buildings. His arms morphed into long chainsaws, and his robotic head also had a chainsaw protruding out of it. His buttons were opened up, and the malicious glow in his eyes intensified with every minute. Oh? You're not dead. Seeing him walk out unharmed, the two devils couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. You too have killed many humans, right? I guess it's okay for me to kill you then. Die, brat. The leech devil shot multiple tentacles towards him, which exploded forth towards him with a powerful force. Denji snarled and blasted forward, his body moving like a bullet, as he slashed his chainsaws towards the incoming tentacle, drawing massive spurts of blood, along with a shrill cry of pain from the leech devil, but he didn't stop there. He rushed towards the bat devil, who seemed to take a step back in fear, as she slashed his chainsaws with all of her might. However, before his attack could land, another tentacle from the leech demon smashed into his body, swatting him from midair into a building like a fly as he crashed into the ground and caused a large crater. Sonar cannon. The Bat Devil's mouth morphed into a cannon as it fired a massive blast of sound waves, which immediately raised multiple buildings to the ground, sending Denji flying like a comet as he crashed into the ground a few meters away. Before he could even react, a tentacle wrapped around his body, attempting to squeeze the life out of him, as his bones let out creaking sounds. The tentacle pulled him towards the Leech and Bat Devil, as both of them looked at him with ridicule. "Very soon. Your friend and her pet will rot in my stomach, you wretched human." The Bat Devil roared in laughter as the Leech Devil squeezed even tighter, causing jets of blood to spurt out of Denji's body, causing him to let out a painful roar. "Poor human, let me put you out of misery." The Leech Devil laughed evilly, bringing Denji close to her face as her mouth opened wide. However, just as she was about to drop him into her disgusting mouth, her tentacle was cleaved by an invisible force, as the space around her body seemed to fold like a mirror and shatter. Multiple buildings behind her were slashed into two by the same invisible force as they collapsed. Arg! A shrill, painful cry reverberated, along with a spurt of blood, as Denji's body was pulled away by an invisible force. Suddenly, the dust cleared as a figure dressed in a black leather jacket with both of his hands in the side pockets, and in a white shirt, black pants, and shoes appeared. His silver hair was spiked up, and one end of his blindfold was pulled up to his forehead, revealing a glistening blue eye. His body levitated in the sky, and he indifferently glanced at the two devils before him as he gently lowered Denji's body onto the ground. "Who do you think you are?" Sonar cannon. The Bat Devil roared out in fury, as its mouth morphed into a cannon and fired a highly condensed sound energy wave, which instantly destroyed everything in its path. The dust settled after a few moments only for the two devils to see the silver-haired youth standing in the air as if it was solid ground, with his fingers in a hand seal and a cocky smile on his face. "Let's get this over with." Satoru smiled as he stretched forth his palm and pointed it towards the Bat Devil first. Instantly, immense fear seemed to seize the body of the Bat Devil, as it was rendered completely immobile. The space around its body, to the normal eye, resembled a shattered mirror as it began to fold. The next second, the sound of whistles and slashes reverberated as the Bat Devil's body was cleanly divided into three, as blood and intestines spurted all over, painting a bloody scene. The figure of a young girl with blood-red horns on her head instantly fell to the ground, along with a white fluffy cat in a cage. Satoru merely glanced at her as an invisible force grabbed her and the cat and brought them near Denji's body. "Sigh. I was planning on slicing you into two pieces, but you're so weak." Satoru chuckled as his eye glanced at the Leech Devil, who seemed to be paralyzed due to fear and immense horror. Is this his true power? Meanwhile, on the roof of a building a few meters away from the battlefield, Oki stood with a completely gobsmacked expression as he saw Satoru in action. Is that his true power? On a tall building a few meters away with a gobsmacked expression as he watched Satoru in action. Devil Hunter HQ. Within the office of the head of the Devil Hunters Association, a beautiful young woman reclined in her seat, while her eyes were completely transfixed on the screen of her laptop. Her long pink hair was tied in a bun, and her golden eyes flickered with a mix of surprise and shock. On the screen was the video of a young white-haired youth in a blindfold who seemed to be levitating in the sky, while his every move seemed to break the laws of physics themselves. "I was hoping to slash you into two, but you're just so weak," she heard him say, before he flashed a cocky smile, which made her furrow her brows. Meanwhile, after slaying the Bat Devil, fear and immense terror seemed to grip the heart of the Leech Devil, as it seemingly froze, seeing the corpse of its mate. Satoru descended slowly towards Denji, who seemed to have woken up at a point in power, who had her eyes transfixed on him the whole time. "Who are you?" When he reached them, she felt the immense and overwhelming amounts of negative energy his body emanated and couldn't help but ask. "Gojo Satoru. Special Division 4. I'm a civilian devil hunter." He picked up a card from his pocket and waved it to her before he flashed her a small smile and walked over to Denji. "Oi. Do I really have to keep coming over to save your ass?" Satoru asked as Denji turned his head slowly and flashed a small smile. Thanks, man," Denji uttered before he closed his eyes once more. Suddenly, a figure descended behind them and walked directly to Denji and Power. You finally decided to show yourself. Satoru smiled as Oki glanced at him. The leech devil, who had been effectively ignored by everyone, came back to its senses in a few seconds. Although her mate had been killed right before her eyes in one attack, now everything was clear to her. He had only been killed because he was careless. And as long as she managed to close the distance to him, she would be able to kill him and avenge her loved one. And before everyone could even realize, she shot towards them on her 4 feet, using her tentacles as propellers to move even faster, as the ground beneath her feet was crushed due to the immense force she was traveling with. Harg! A bestial roar escaped from her lips as she blasted one of her tentacles towards the disgusting humans with immense force. Oki and Power were wide-eyed as they saw the tentacle in front of them in a split second, traveling with enough force to level a building. Boom! However, just as it was about to ruthlessly smash into them, it stopped a few inches away from their bodies, as the overwhelming force crashed into a small building behind them. Seeing the huge tentacle an inch from taking his life, Oki couldn't help but wipe a drop of sweat from his forehead as he stared at Satoru, who stood unconcerned as usual. You dirty human! I'll rip your flesh from your bones and drink your blood. I'll make you regret killing my Batsy. The leech devil roared out as it blasted another tentacle towards them, only for it to stop in front of them just like the previous attack. Being the kind person that I am, why don't I let you go meet your mate in the afterlife since you miss him so much? Satoru chuckled and took a step forward before he waved his hand. Slash! The sound of slashes and mirrors reverberated as the massive tentacles before them were instantly cleaved by an invisible force and collapsed to the ground along with spurts of blood. A simple technique, an application of the limitless, which involved using space itself as a weapon by hardening and thinning its molecules via cursed energy to create invisible slashes, effective and precise. Arg! The leech devil let out a roar in pain, and with a mere glance from Satoru, its body was hurled flying like a meteor as it smashed into multiple structures, causing even more destruction. Let's end this. Satoru smiled and formed a hand seal with both hands, and the next second, long and huge stone pillars arose behind him like spears, and with a command, they shot towards the leech devil and completely rammed through its body, pinning it into a building like a bullseye, effectively ending its life. You! Which devil do you have a contract with? Oki looked at Satoru, who picked up Denji's body and asked with furrowed brows. Contract? Like an agreement? Do I get paid? He asked as Oki helped Power up, as both of them looked at him like he was a fool. Back at the HQ, after taking Denji to be healed, Oki, Power and Satoru sat together in a lounge. Power had a grim expression on her face as he continually examined Satoru, who was sipping his soda with a smile, while Oki lit up a cigarette and smoked as he heaved multiple breaths. Are you sure you're not a devil? Fiend. Power continued to ask questions, as Satoru sighed and reclined in the soft sofa. I already told you. My name is GOJO Satoru and I'm a human. He replied as he adjusted his glasses. Maybe you're a spawn from the union between a devil and a human and a fiend, or a devil and a fiend. She kept on formulating theories, as Satoru felt a headache just from listening to her rants. So you're saying your abilities do not come from an external source? How is that possible? Oki suddenly spoke and looked at Satoru, who seemed to be resting. I don't know how that is impossible. Surely you don't think devils are the only ones with special abilities, do you? Satoru put down his soda and folded his arms before speaking. Devils are born from humanity's fears. They embody the power of the fear from which they are born. For example, the bat devil and leech devils have the powers to emit sonic waves and devour just like bats and leeches can. Oki explained as Satoru listened carefully. The Chainsaw Man universe wasn't a place he was familiar with, unlike other anime verses. At least some information about the universe would enable him to know how to tread forward from now on. In this world, humans are at the bottom of the food chain, and in order to survive, power is necessary. He flicked the cigarette away with his finger before he looked at Satoru and continued. There are various ways to gain power in this world, but the most effective is to have a contract with another devil in exchange for their ability. Satoru furrowed his brows. In other words, you use the abilities of devils to take down devils. He asked as Oki nodded. However, it's not so easy. Just as Oki was about to continue, a voice resounded. and they turned around only to see a young woman dressed in a black suit, with short dark hair and a blindfold over her right eye, standing beside them. Himino senpai. Oki nodded as a form of greeting, while Power and Satoru sat calmly. In order to gain power from a devil, you'll need to sacrifice something of value. She smiled and sat beside Satoru. In my case, I made a contract with the ghost devil, and in exchange, I offered up my right eye. She pointed to her blindfold and said, before resting her gaze back on him, "What about you, hotshot?" She smiled seductively and winked with her left eye. So in other words, you need to sacrifice a part of your body in order to be able to make a contract with the devil? Sounds like trouble. Satoru furrowed his brows and spoke, ignoring the young woman beside him. My contract with the fox devil allows me to summon her, but I offer up pieces of my flesh in return. Oki said and took out another cigarette. Why don't you tell us more about you, Satoru? Power, who had been quiet all this while, suddenly spoke as Himino and Oki looked at him. I hate to say this, but I think we'll be working together from now on. Why don't you let us know a bit about you? Oki chipped in. Well, I have not made a contract with any devil and I don't know if I ever would. He said and crossed his legs. As for my power, let's just say I can manipulate space. He said, as everyone looked at each other in confusion. Well, how about a little demonstration? Himino said, as Power nodded. Fine. Just a bit. Satoru sighed and gestured to Power. Stretch your palm towards me. He stretched his palm first and gestured for her to do the same. However, when her palm was a few inches away from his palm, it stopped completely, as if an invisible wall were separating both palms from each other. Satoru pointed to the phenomenon that was happening, as Oki and Himino looked at each other and at him. She's not completely stopped, but the more she tries to move, the slower she goes. He explained as he moved his hand forward and touched her palms, but the moment he pushed back his palm, the invisible wall formed once more, as Power's palm was blocked once more. You're using space as a force field? Oki asked after a bit of thought. Not exactly. This technique allows me to materialize infinity into reality. With it, I can create an infinite distance between myself and any object. He spoke, after which he sat down under the shocked gaze of Oki and Himino. That's truly overpowered. Himino said with a surprised smile. It's a pretty simple theory actually. No matter how fast you run, you cannot cross an infinite distance because it never ends. It's the same way. Any object that tries to reach me would have to cross an infinite distance to reach me, unless I wish otherwise. Satoru picked up his soda and spoke nonchalantly. What about you? Satoru pointed at Power. I'm a fiend, the blood fiend. I was once the mighty blood devil, but after taking on a human form, I became a fiend. Power said with a cocky smile. Buzz. Suddenly, Oki took out his phone from his pocket, which was buzzing, and left abruptly without saying a word. Office of the head of the Devil Hunters Association. Makima reclined in her seat as she gazed at the ceiling, lost in a flurry of thoughts when she heard a knock on the door. Come in. She spoke as Oki entered the office and bowed respectfully. You called for me, Ms. Makima. He stood like a soldier and spoke, while she placed her hand on her cheek and let out a small smile. No need to keep standing. She gestured as he sat after a bit of hesitation. I just wanted to know your thoughts about your team, Special Division 4. She wrapped a finger on the table and spoke, her golden eyes glaring deep into his. Denji is rash and unpredictable. Power is eccentric, but her abilities are not bad, and Satoru is ridiculously strong. He cleared his throat and said after a bit of thought. I see. You know, you have become a lot more reserved after meeting your new team, unlike the Oki I knew before. Makima said with a small laugh as Oki coughed in a bit of surprise. Anyway, as for Denji and Power, if they should refuse an order, you know what to do. But as for Satoru, you'll have to report to me first. She spoke as he nodded. If that's that, then I want you to prepare your team for a new mission. She spoke and handed him a file. You'll be working with another team, so don't worry about backup. She smiled and said, as Oki took the file and looked through it. Devil Hunter HQ. B03 Satoru woke up the next morning feeling a slight headache as he opened his eyes. Although he had gotten used to the headaches and the side effects of having the 6 eyes, having a constant headache every morning was pretty annoying. He sat in his bed for a while before he unwillingly pulled himself off the soft mattress. He was dressed in only a pair of baggy sweatpants, and he walked to the hall, opened the fridge and took out a bottle of water before downing everything in one go. He walked to the bathroom to brush his teeth quickly and began his morning routine, which normally consisted of intense training. After about a couple of hours, he stepped out of the training room and entered the bathroom for a cold shower before putting on a pair of black baggy sweatpants and a tight black t-shirt and walking to the hall with an excited smile. It was time for his favorite meal of the day, breakfast. Call it whatever you want, but after spending his whole life in poverty, Satoru knew and understood what it meant to have a plate of toast and jam, fried eggs, bacon and orange juice on his table for breakfast every morning. Putting on his glasses, he walked to the hall with his food on a tray, placed it on the center table and sat comfortably while watching an MMA fight on the TV. Who knew the Chainsaw Man universe would have things like MMA, boxing, and some other fighting sports from his previous life? Come on. Picking up a slice of bread and placing it in his mouth, he suddenly exclaimed as he watched one fighter land an illegal elbow attack. Knock. As he was engrossed in the attack, he heard a knock on the door as 2 figures suddenly entered unannounced. Oi! I never said you could enter. Satoru facepalmed, seeing Oki and Himino enter the hall and sit right beside him. Your place is really neat, compared to other devil hunters I know. Himino looked around as a smile blossomed on her face. She immediately picked up a toast from Satoru's plate and leaned close to him, while Oki shook his head seeing her shameless act. What do you guys want? I'm kinda in the middle of something right now. Satoru spoke as he weaved and bobbed his head around, as if he were the one fighting on the TV. It's about a mission. Oki spoke and placed a file next to Satoru's tray of food. What's in it for me? He said, still engrossed in the MMA battle. Ms. Makima has promised $5,000 if you help us. Oki said with a sigh. Wait. What? 5,000. Himino cried out in surprise. What? Why the hell is he getting paid this much? Our allowances are not even up to this. Her eyes darted suspiciously between Oki and Satoru. Well, you know, his working conditions are a bit different from ours. Although he works under Special Division 4, he's more of a civilian devil hunter. Oki whispered. Fine. I accept. Let's hear the details. Satoru sighed and unwillingly turned off the TV and turned to the both of them. A devil has been spotted in Hotel Morino, and I've been tasked to stop it. We don't know what devil it is, nor do we know how strong it is, but all we know is it's consumed a piece of a bullet from the gun devil. Oki's voice turned stern as he finished his statement. Gun devil. Satoru repositioned his glasses well, as Himino couldn't help but blush seeing his beautiful eyes. One of the strongest devils in the world. She chipped in as Oki nodded with his fist secretly clenched. How strong is it? Satoru asked while going through the file. He killed 1.2 million all over the world in a matter of minutes, including my family. Oki said as he took a deep breath. I see. Satoru nodded with a frown. The gun devil was so strong that as it moved, pieces of its flesh that resembled bullets fell off, and devils who feasted on those pieces grew stronger. Himino chipped in and explained. Oki immediately pulled out a metal bus chain and showed it to them. This is a piece of flesh from the gun devil. He said as the bullet began to wriggle. It can detect any other piece of the gun devil's flesh, so with this, we can find the devil and kill it. He spoke sternly. This is where we need your help, Satoru. We don't know how strong the devil has become. We need you on our side at the very least. Himino chipped in and looked at him with a dreamy eye. Fine. But don't forget to tell Makima to pay me, otherwise I won't be as understanding and agreeable as I am now. He said, picked up the tray and walked to the kitchen, before he walked to his bedroom for a change of clothes. You think he can handle whatever thing is inside there? Himino suddenly looked at Oki and asked with a frown. You've not seen him in action, Himino. If anyone can handle the Eternity Devil, It should be him. Oki smiled and said, as he reclined in Satoru's comfortable sofa. A while later, Satoru, Himino and Oki walked out of the HQ and rendezvoused with Denji, Power, and 2 new teammates in front of a small coffee shop. Satoru. Denji was the first to run to them, and he went and hugged Satoru, who stood with a surprised expression. I guess you're back in one piece. Satoru patted Denji's shoulder, wondering how he was back to full health so soon. I guess you guys have met already, so let me introduce you to the final member of our team. Oki spoke, referring to Denji and Power, as well as the new mysterious figures standing beside him. Guys, this is Gojo Satoru. Satoru, meet Hirokazu Arai and Higashiyama Kobini. Oki did swift introductions, as Satoru nodded to a tall man with short black hair. Seeing the petite figure shivering in fear beside him, Satoru waved slightly, as a small smile escaped his lips and turned away. Okay, our ride should be here any moment. Oki said, and right after, a black SUV pulled up before them. As Satoru immediately hopped to the front seat, Oki took the wheel, and the rest of them sat in the back. Within the vehicle, Satoru's glasses were lowered to his nose, and his eyes were closed as he enjoyed the cool breeze. His purple long-necked jacket had a few buttons opened, revealing the black shirt on the inside, and his legs were crossed like a gentleman. Oi! You know, we devil hunters are required to wear suits on missions. Oki said, looking at him. In the back seat, almost everyone except Himino and Arai has dozed off. Sorry, I'm not a big fan of suits. Satoru slowly opened his eyes and smiled before saying, I see. Oki said and nodded. And what do you think about Ms. Makima? Oki suddenly asked, as Satoru glanced at him from the corner of his eyes. I think she's a bitch. Himino suddenly said, as Oki rolled his eyes. I wasn't asking you, Himino. He said with a pout. Of course, since you know what I would say already. Seriously, I don't know why you guys are so obsessed with her. She might be beautiful, but why don't you see what I see? She spoke and folded her arms in frustration. Ms. Makima is a good person. Denji, who was fast asleep, woke up with a yawn and said, while looking at Himino. Yeah, right. A good person who treats us like pets. Didn't you hear what she told us, Denji? She said we are to be executed should we refuse any orders. How cruel is that? Even I don't treat Meowie that way. Power grumbled as she woke up in frustration. Due to her position as the head of Devil Hunters Association, her job requires strict and unbiased judgment. Oki cut in and said. Meanwhile, Satoru listened as the others argued. Why do Denji and Oki sound like loverbores when talking about her? He thought for a moment, as his brows furrowed. Not that it was impossible for 2 youths to like one girl, but the fact that they were blatantly ignoring the evils Himino, Power, and even Arai, who was currently speaking, said about her was a bit weird to him. Maybe love worked in mysterious ways after all. For someone who had never fallen in love in his past life, he didn't know much when it came to emotions and feelings. The majority of what he knew about them was from watching anime and comics, so he wasn't going to judge. After all, boys were boys, right? Anyway, Satoru, like I asked, what do you think about Ms. Makima? Oki threw the question back to him as he shook his head. I don't think about her. He spoke with a chuckle, as Denji and Oki couldn't help but let out surprised expressions. Meanwhile, Power and Himino smiled and began seeing him in a new light, with way more respect. After all, it wasn't easy for a guy to resist the charms of someone like Makima, at least in their opinion. We're here. After a few minutes of silence, they reached their destination, as Oki parked the car in a safe spot before everyone got out. The next moment, all 6 of them began to walk right into the hotel, with Satoru and Ski in the lead. Satoru took out some Pringles from his side pockets and began munching on them. However, a few meters near the hotel, he felt the immense negative energy perforating every pore of the hotel as he stopped in his tracks abruptly. Satoru, what's wrong? Oki suddenly asked as the others turned around. The devil is in the hotel. It might be stronger than we think. He said, before taking a bite from the Pringle in hand, looking a bit surprised. Seeing the others giving him the "what the hell is he talking about" look, he sighed and went on to explain. In my opinion, the strength of devils is characterized by the sheer output of the negative energy they produce. A small output means a weak devil, and a large output means a strong devil, he said in one breath. And how can you tell whether a devil has strong negative energy output or a weak one? Himino asked. Let's just say I have really, really good eyes. Satoru said and gently lowered his glasses, flashing his azure gem-like eyes at them, which left everyone stunned for a moment. Let's just say I have really, really special eyes. Satoru gently lowered his glasses and flashed them a peek of his azure gem-like eyes as they watched with a stunned expression. All right everyone, let's go in. Oki spoke as everyone nodded and walked into the hotel solemnly. With Oki and Satoru leading the way, the others walked behind, a smooth journey, until they reached the 4th floor. The flesh of the gun devil is reacting, Oki said as he watched the bullet on the chain wriggle. The negative energy has gone up a notch as well. Whatever devil is here, we are getting closer to it. Satoru said casually, with both of his hands in his side pockets. Beside him, Oki couldn't help but sigh. Once one attained overwhelming power, it was difficult to not be cocky. At the very least, he was glad Satoru was on their side. Oi, Satoru, what are your dreams? Upon reaching the 5th floor, Denji suddenly asked, as Satoru raised an eyebrow. Why don't you tell us about yours first, Denji? Arai chipped in and asked as Denji rubbed his temples in exasperation. Back then, my biggest goal was to fondle a woman's breast, but after doing it, I wasn't happy, nor was I satisfied. Now my biggest goal is to kiss a girl. Denji spoke with seriousness as everyone stopped moving and looked at him. Suddenly, Himino, Power and even Kobeni broke out in laughter after hearing his so-called biggest dream. What? That's my dream. It might not be the noblest of dreams, but at least it's worth fighting for in my opinion. Denji argued as Himino and Power fell to the ground in laughter. Oh my god. This guy is so funny. You know you should quit being a devil hunter and become a comedian or a circus freak instead. Himino laughed as she wiped drops of tears from her eyes. It's alright, Denji. As long as it makes you happy and you think it's worth it, I support your dream. Satoru suddenly said, as Denji flashed a grateful smile. Anyway, speaking of dreams, what's yours, Arai? Himino asked as Arai rubbed his head in a shy manner. My dream is to settle down with a beautiful girl and have a family, children. 2 boys and a girl. To grow old together and to die in each other's arms. Arai spoke as Satoru rolled his eyes. Oh. That's so nice, Arai. I hope your dream comes true. Himino smiled as they continued their journey. What about you, Hotshot? What is your dream? She asked as everyone cast their eyes on Satoru. To become the strongest. He spoke swiftly, as Oki and the others nodded with respect. Wait. The moment they reached the 8th floor, Satoru stopped in his tracks for a moment, feeling a sense of foreboding, as if the 6 eyes were telling him to descend the stairs and leave right now. Suddenly, he saw an immense amount of negative energy instantly cover the entire floor as space around them began to fracture like mirrors. It was as if they were being pulled into another plane of existence or, even more specifically, a domain. Not only that, but he also sensed a new and foreign energy creeping through the surrounding shadows. This new negative energy was of a lower output compared to the previous one, but it had a dark element to it. However, he was the only one who could see this at the moment. Even Power, who was even more attuned to negative energy on a level near his, he hadn't been able to see nor sense a single thing. What is it, Satoru? Oki suddenly asked, seeing the skin of the gun devil reacting strongly, as if something terrifying was coming their way. We're trapped. A small chuckle escaped his lips before he spoke, taking everyone aback for a moment. What do you mean we're trapped? We haven't even encountered the devil. Himino was the first to speak out, seeing Kobeni enter panic mode immediately. Somehow, the devil managed to construct some sort of domain, or a pocket dimension so quickly that even I only noticed it at the last minute. He spoke as he adjusted his glasses. Also, there's a new negative energy in the building. If my suspicions are true, then we should be dealing with more than one devil here. He sighed and relaxed against a wall. I don't believe it. How can we be trapped? Arai said with shivering confidence as he rushed down the stairs. The next moment, everyone saw him descend down the stairs towards them, although they had clearly seen him go down. How is this possible? Oki spoke as sweat dripped down his forehead. Oi, Denji. You and Power should try entering the rooms to see if you can get access to other different rooms. Satoru spoke as Denji and Power entered the rooms, while Arai and Oki descended and ascended the stairs. However, a moment later, a door creaked as Denji and Power came out of the very door they walked in and faced everyone, while Oki and Arai also arrived on the same floor. Satoru. It's like we're trapped on the 8th floor. Oki said, as Kobeni began to scream in panic. Satoru was lost in deep thought when a door creaked and opened, and two grotesque beings walked out. The first creature was the head of a man, about knee-length in height, with human feet sticking out of the side of its head, allowing it to move. The second creature looked like the ghastly blend of shadows and darkness, with its form resembling a large snake. It slithered towards them, making hissing sounds. Smelling the fear and terror from some of the devil hunters, the first creature attacked first, as the legs on its body propelled it forward at fast speeds, as it reached out towards Kobeni, who entered extreme panic mode. When it was a few inches away from her, an invisible force gripped it, seizing it in the air. Himino, who had her hand outstretched, simply smiled as Satoru furrowed his eyebrows and chuckled after. An invisible arm. He spoke as Himeno's eyebrows lifted in surprise. Her contract with the Ghost Devil allowed her to summon any body part of the Ghost Devil. The next second, blood burst out from Power's body and coalesced into a katana which she slashed with a bloodthirsty laugh, effectively splitting the devil into two, killing it immediately, as blood splashed all over. Satoru. How do we deal with the snake devil? Oki asked after studying the huge snake figure before them. It's not a snake devil. Its body seems to shift in between shadows, so it's likely to be a physical manifestation of the shadow devil. It would be a bit troublesome to deal with due to its ability to shift between corporeal and incorporeal states. Satoru murmured as Oki raised an eyebrow. The next moment, the snake-like devil figure began to turn incorporeal, as its body began to shift in between the shadows of the lamp stands. The next second, before they could even realize, multiple tentacles erupted right from within their own shadows and pierced towards them. Watch out! Oki roared out, but it was too late. No one had expected such a turn of events. A few inches from their bodies, the shadows were forcefully halted in their tracks by an invisible shield, as everyone opened their eyes only to see the tendrils of shadows right before their faces. After a few seconds, the shadows retreated and phased out of existence, as Himeno heaved a sigh of relief. Thanks, Satoru. You saved me yet again. Power said, as a large hammer materialized in her hand. The next second towards the shadow devil, which had now phased into existence. Don't thank me. I didn't think it was going to work. What? Oh. Everyone's jaws dropped at his statement. I thought you said it was impenetrable. Himeno asked with a frown. It should be. I just haven't tested it against invisible and incorporeal attacks. He spoke, and the next instant he sidestepped to the left and narrowly dodged a shadow tendril, which shot right past his face. The next moment, Power, who had gone on the offensive against the shadow devil, was hurled towards it with immense force as she crashed into Satoru's infinity and slid to the ground in a helpless manner. My attacks can't touch it. She spoke as Satoru sighed and began to walk forward while slowly taking off his glasses. Oi, Satoru. What are you doing? Denji roared out as Oki furrowed his brows. Don't worry. It's troublesome, but I have a way to restrain it. He flashed a confident smile and stood face to face with the shadow devil, which had increased in size and now filled the entire hallway. You might be able to phase in between shadows, but you can't phase through space, and unfortunately for you, I just recently learned a technique that is detrimental to you. Satoru smiled confidently and stretched forth his index and middle fingers like a gun. Shriek. A shrill voice echoed out as the shadow devil shot towards Satoru at a fast pace, shifting between multiple shadows, and reached him in a split second. The next moment, Multiple tendrils of shadows pierced towards him at fast speeds, as he skillfully dodged every single one of them with the simplest of movements. He continually dodged multiple attacks for a while, and waited for an opportunity. The moment the Shadow Devil phased back out of the shadows, he smiled and raised his right middle and index fingers. Gotcha! The devil was about to phase into a shadow when the space around its body began to shatter like mirrors, as its body was immediately encased in some sort of invisible spatial cage. It began to thrash around, trying to phase out of the cage but to no avail. Satoru then stretched forth his hand and clenched it, as the spatial cage suddenly crumbled into itself like glass and exploded, leaving behind only specks of black flames in the air. Did he just kill it in one move? Arai was the first to speak out, as a large smile appeared on his face. Man, I'm really glad you're part of our team. Without you, we would all be either dead or badly injured. Himino chipped in, as Oki and Denji only smiled lightly. Don't rejoice just yet. The real fight has only begun. Satoru picked up his glasses and put them back on as he spoke in an ominous tone, snapping everyone back to reality. Within one of the hotel rooms, the group chose to relax and calm their minds for a bit in preparation for whatever battles lay ahead. Denji, Power, and Arai were fast asleep on two beds. Kobeni kept screaming in panic, which did nothing but annoy Satoru. Hi, Himino. How are we going to get out of here? She cried and screamed out as Himino patted her back. Don't lose hope, Kobeni. We'll find a way out of this. Her words only fueled the flames, as the young girl cried out even more. You know, there's something you can do to help everyone here. Suddenly, Satoru, who was calmly seated on a rocking chair, spoke out as Kobeni raised her head. Me? What can I do? She pointed to herself as Satoru nodded. Shut the hell up. He mentioned every word with increasing rage, while an overpowering energy burst out of his body. The young girl instantly passed out, as Satoru heaved a relieved sigh. What is wrong with you? Why knock her out? Himino instantly got up in rage as she readied herself for attack. Meanwhile, Satoru only shifted his glasses for a second, allowing his right eye to rest on her body in an indifferent manner. Himino, please calm down for a second. We all know putting Kobeni to sleep was the right course of action. Oki voiced out his thoughts while calmly seated on a chair in a corner. Himino grumbled as her eye cast a vicious glare at Satoru but sat immediately. I should have knocked her out a while ago. Satoru reeled in silence as Himino constantly glared at him murderously. She knew he was right, but she just couldn't bring herself to knock out her own friend. Satoru, have you found anything else that could help us escape? Oki asked as Satoru took a deep breath. Indeed I have. He nodded. If we want to escape this damned place, there are only two ways to do it. He extended two fingers as he spoke slowly. If my assumptions about this being a domain are correct, then the concentration of negative energy on the inside should be greater than the concentration outside. He said as Oki descended into deep thoughts. So you mean, destroying it from the inside should be impossible, but from the outside, it should be possible. After a few moments he spoke, as Satoru nodded with a smile. You're right. In order to construct a domain, one would need to focus an immense amount of energy to maintain the inner part of the domain, leaving the outer part vulnerable and susceptible to destruction. Satoru added. So if we can get other devil hunters to destroy the building from the outside, we should be able to escape. Himino asked after calming down for a bit. Exactly. Satoru nodded. The only problem is, time itself has been paused in here. When we entered, the second hand of the clock was on 5 and hadn't moved an inch. He said and pointed at a nearby clock without moving. Maybe it's broken. Oki asked and looked at him, while Himino sighed. It's not. Satoru shook his head. A devil that is able to affect the flow of time and space in its own domain. How troublesome. Rubbing his temples in exhaustion, Satoru couldn't help but shake his head. You said there are two ways. What's the second? Himino asked. After observing the rooms for a while, I noticed something. He spoke as both of them carefully listened. There are immense amounts of negative energy flowing through each and every single block that makes up the hotel rooms. He said. And what's that supposed to mean? She asked back as Satoru crossed his legs. Imagine this hotel as a giant body. The blocks being the blood vessels and the negative energy flowing through the vessels, it's blood. Satoru said with a small smile. Hold on. Are you saying we are inside the body of the devil? Himino was the first to freak out, as Oki wiped the drops of sweat on his face. Could be. Satoru nodded. Besides, the probability should exceed 60%. Now it makes sense to me why I wasn't able to sense the domain trap all along. He sighed. But if we're in the body of the devil, how do we escape? Oki asked, as his expression turned grave for a moment. It's simple. If I'm right, then the heart and vital organs of the devil should also be in the building. Hence, if we can destroy that, then technically, we should be able to escape. Satoru spoke with a smile. If not. His eyes turned grave for a second before he relaxed and flashed a small smile. If not, what? Himino asked with a frown. I'll have to use a trump card. He said after a few moments of silence. And why not use it now? She felt like screaming and punching his all-too-perfect face. I have never even tried using it, and only have theoretical knowledge on it. In other words, if I use the attack, the probability of death increases exponentially. He said and closed his eyes to relax. Satoru, there's something I want to ask. Oki said and looked at him. Why haven't you tried using your slashing attacks or anything in your arsenal to try to destroy the place? He said, as Himeno's brows furrowed in surprise. Like I said, the concentration of negative energy on the inside of the domain is extremely terrifying. Besides, if the devil is able to manipulate space like I can, then it can nullify almost all of my attacks. He said, as Oki nodded. Himino, why don't we go see if we can find any unusual spots? If it swallowed the price of flesh from the gun devil, then we can use the piece of flesh from the gun devil to locate its internal organs. Oki said and took out the bullet chain from his pocket. Fine. She sighed and stood up, as both of them walked out, leaving Satoru in deep thought. The hallway of the 8th floor was like an unending abyss, as the two devil hunters strode without fear or fatigue. Oki held out the flesh of the gun devil as a compass and let it lead their way as they constantly examined their surroundings. Oi, Oki, do you think we'll really make it out of here? Suddenly, Himino stopped and asked, which made Oki stop after a few steps. I don't know. He said after a moment, which made her sigh heavily. You know, I don't trust Gojo Satoru. He's planning something. She said as she calmed herself and continued the walk with him. I don't trust him either, but he's the only one who can see what is happening outside the physical. At the very least, I do trust his abilities and his affection for Denji. I know he'll definitely not let Denji die in this place. He said as his eyes turned sharp for a moment. I see. Himino nodded as both of them continued their walk down the endless hallway. However, after a few minutes, Oki felt the flesh of the gun devil react strongly as he stopped. Hold on. Something's coming. Suddenly, Himino roared out as the building began to shake. Shriek. A shrill voice sounded out as they witnessed a disgusting scene. An extremely large mass of flesh, like puddles of mud, with innumerable heads, hands, and feet, began to rush towards them. It filled the entire hallway as it propelled itself towards the two devil hunters at a fast speed. Give me the chainsaw boy and the one with the immense negative energy, and I'll let you go. Its voice was like the shrill screams of women and children as it moved towards them without stopping for a moment. Run! Oki and Himino instantly bolted away at full speed, with fear evident in their eyes, as they tried their very best to escape the monster behind them. Meanwhile, Satoru was calmly meditating within the hotel room when his eyes snapped open in a split second. He instantly took off his glasses and walked out as the whole building began to shake furiously, alerting the others who were fast asleep. What the hell is going on? Arai roared out as he, Denji and Power bolted out of the room, leaving a terrified Kobeni, who chose to follow them at the last moment. Satoru stood in front of the hotel room, as the others stood behind him. His eyes turned sharp in a moment, as his negative energy began to bubble inside his body, like lava, ready to erupt. In a few moments, everyone saw Oki and Himeno being chased by the disgusting mass of flesh, as terror and fear gripped some of the hearts of Arai and Kobeni as they took steps back. Meanwhile, Satoru stood fearlessly with both of his hands in his side pockets, with Denji and Power standing on his left and right, respectively. "Oi! Denji, Power, get ready to catch," he uttered and raised his index and middle fingers. "Catch." Power and Denji looked at each other in confusion but readied themselves nonetheless. Meanwhile, the devil was infinitely close to both Oki and Himeno, who were still running for their lives. While running, Himeno instantly slipped and crashed to the ground as the devil conjured huge spears from its mass of flesh, which shot towards her. Closing her eyes to accept her fate, she felt a hand wrap around her waist as Oki grabbed her and bolted forward like a cheetah while dodging the long spears. Though they had escaped the spear attacks, the devil had now moved infinitesimally close to them, as one of its heads opened wide like a huge maw and threatened to devour both of them. Himeno's eye widened as she spotted the huge maw filled with sharp teeth that looked over and cast a large shadow over their figures. In a split second, the huge mouth dropped on their bodies in an attempt to swallow them whole. However, when the teeth of the huge mouth were an inch from Himeno's head, an invisible force latched onto their bodies, as they felt a massive force pull their bodies forward. The next second, they were immediately flung in the air, as Denji and Power caught both of them and bolted back to Satoru's position. Meanwhile, the devil reached them in a moment and opened its mouth once more in an attempt to devour Satoru when it smashed into an invisible shield heavily, causing the ground to crack. "Who are you?" Satoru walked forward fearlessly and asked, standing only a few meters away from the devil. "I am the Eternity Devil." The shrill voice resounded as the hallway shook. "You humans are trapped in this dimension, but I can let you go. In exchange, I want you and that chainsaw brat to sacrifice yourselves." Ha 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 ha. All of the mouths spoke at the same time, as the eyes greedily glared at Satoru and Denji's figures. Within the hotel room, everyone sat in silence and in deep contemplation. "There's no way I'll allow you guys to sacrifice yourselves. I say we team up and take down that disgusting devil. How hard can it be?" Power was the first to speak up, trying to rally and raise the willpower of everyone, but to no avail. Everyone had clearly seen what the Eternity Devil was capable of and how it almost killed Oki and Himeno. "I think Power is right. We can't allow our teammates to go and sacrifice themselves for us. That would be cruel and selfish on our part," Oki said, while taking off his blazer, as he sat down and reclined in his seat. Meanwhile, everyone's eyes momentarily glanced at the back of the silver-haired figure who was facing the window, Satoru, the brains of the team, who stood in deep contemplation. He didn't know what would happen if he truly fought against the Eternity Devil. At the very least, he didn't want Denji to be caught up in the battle, because he'd only distract him. "It's all right. I'll go," he suddenly said without turning around, which caused Oki's and Denji's eyes to widen in shock. "Oi! If you're going, then I'm going too. The Eternity Devil wanted us both. I can't let you go die." Denji roared out as Satoru glanced at him from the corner of his eye. He didn't like playing the asshole to people he cared about, but now he had no choice. "You won't." He adjusted his glasses as he looked out the window once more into the setting sun. Unbeknownst to them, they had been there for a whole day and a half on the outside. "Why not? Are you crazy? I'm not going to just let you go kill yourself." Denji roared out as Satoru subtly sighed. "If you go with me, you'll only get in my way, Denji. You'll be a nuisance because you're weak, and your weakness would cost me dearly in that fight." Satoru steeled his resolve as he spoke, eliciting multiple gasps from the rest of the team. "I am a nuisance to you." Denji held back a sob as he held back a tear and walked out, slamming the door behind him. The moment he did, everyone couldn't help but cast a glance at Satoru, who heaved multiple deep breaths before taking a seat in exasperation. After a few minutes, only Denji and Oki were left in the room, as Oki cast a glance at Satoru, who seemed to be meditating. "You know, I understand why you would say those hurtful things to him." Oki suddenly spoke as Satoru opened his eyes and sighed. "I had a little brother once, and I know the lengths I'd travel just to keep him safe." He added with a small smile, as Satoru rested his cheek on his fist. "So how do you plan on facing the Eternity Devil? Do you have a plan of attack or a contingency?" he asked as a smile formed on Satoru's face. "Well, I do have a plan, attack." Satoru spoke briefly. "Besides, what if the Eternity Devil doesn't keep its word and let you guys out? What would happen then?" Satoru asked and looked at Oki, who became speechless for a moment. "I don't know, but we'll probably fight till our last breaths," he said with a small smile, as Satoru smiled. "Also, if it indeed keeps its word, we'll alert the HQ for reinforcements and get you out of there as soon as possible. You'll just need to hold on for as long as you can," Oki said and patted Satoru on the shoulder before walking out. After a few minutes of preparation, Satoru walked out with a smile as he met the others who were waiting outside for him. "It's time." He smiled and stretched his back lazily. "Oi. If you die in the battle, I'll kill you myself." Power spoke and embraced Satoru like a bear and raised him up before patting his back with a smile. "I'm sorry for shouting at you earlier, Satoru. Thank you for everything." Himino and Kobeni walked up to him and hugged him as his nose scrunched in distaste. "Why does it sound like you guys are already preparing for my funeral?" he joked, which elicited a small laugh from the rest of the team. "Oi. I know you didn't mean what you said earlier. You were just saying it to keep me away from the danger." Denji suddenly walked up to him with a slightly down look. "Be safe, okay?" He spoke and patted his shoulder as Satoru ruffled his hair, causing him to smile a little. "Okay, devil. We're here." At the end of the 8th floor, the team stopped as they stood on guard and waited for the enemy to show up. Shriek. The shrill voice scream sounded out as the puddle-like disgusting mass of flesh, heads, and limbs moved towards them. "Oi, devil. You said you'll let the rest go if we surrender. We've come to surrender, but let them go first." Satoru spoke out and took off his glasses slowly, revealing his glistening pair of azure eyes. "Fine." The multiple mouths on the devil spoke at the same time as a door materialized and opened abruptly beside them. Kobeni was the first to rush forward after seeing golden rays of sunshine. It was like seeing a light at the end of a dark abyss as she rushed forward with ecstasy and bliss. Right as she was about to enter, the door morphed into a huge maw filled with sharp teeth, and seeing this, shock and fear gripped her heart as she forced herself to halt abruptly. The huge maw closed abruptly, right in front of her face, as she dashed back to the group with tears in her eyes. "Oi. We have you what you wanted. Now let the rest of us go." Himino roared out, with anger and terror slowly gripping her heart as well. "Fools. You dare trust the words of a devil? Ha 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 ha." The eyes of the Eternity Devil glanced condescendingly at the group as its mouths laughed hysterically. "I'm going to eat you all up, just like I did to all the puny humans in this hotel." It roared out once more, and in that moment, Oki couldn't help but glance at Satoru. He was right after all. They were never supposed to trust the words of a devil. At this point, regret and worry were useless, and they could only prepare themselves for the incoming battle. Satoru's negative energy began to bubble, covering him in a sheath of energy that took on a slightly pinkish hue. Denji opened his buttons and pulled on the string on his chest as his head turned robotic, with a chainsaw protruding from his forehead as his arms morphed into long chainsaws. Meanwhile, Oki and Kobeni readied themselves to provide the necessary assistance to the main attackers of the team if necessary. Boom! The battle instantly began, with the Eternity Devil conjuring multiple long spears from its mass of flesh, which pierced towards both of them. Denji instantly slashed forward with his chainsaws, ripping the spears apart, while all the spears that were piercing towards Satoru were immediately cleaved into two as they fell to the ground and turned to muddy puddles. Ha! Denji was the first to rush forward, dashing forward like a gust of wind. He dodged multiple spears from the Eternity Devil as the blades on his chainsaws began to rotate at fast speeds. He instantly pierced forward, ripping through the huge mass of the Eternity Devil's flesh, causing large amounts of blood to spurt out as the devil roared in pain. Meanwhile, Satoru was not idle. He pressed a finger forward as a massive beam of cursed energy blasted out like a cannon that ripped through the Eternity Devil, creating a massive hole in its body. Meanwhile, power also entered the fray. Multiple streams of blood burst out of her body before they materialized into long spears that pierced into the body of the Eternity Devil. Arg! A shrill scream reverberated throughout the building as the Eternity Devil's eyes glanced furiously and murderously at the three attackers. The next moment, its body began to heal itself in a weird way. All the muddy puddles of flesh on the ground began to move toward it and mended themselves back into its flesh. No way! It's reversing time on itself. Satoru's eyes widened in shock, and the next moment, the Eternity Devil's mouths widened all at once. Instantly, multiple beams of energy shot out and coalesced into one single attack, which blasted towards the team, who had surprised expressions on their faces. No way! It's reversing time on itself. Satoru looked on in shock, and in the next moment, the mouths of the Eternity Devil opened wide, before massive amounts of energy gathered and shot out and joined together into a large beam, which blasted towards the team. Boom! Ha 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 ha. Hysterical laughter reverberated, while the Eternity Devil began to make its way towards the seemingly vaporized group of humans. However, when the dust settled, the next thing the large eyes on its body saw was another beam of energy, many times larger than its own, blasting towards it with immense force. Boom! Its body was hurled backwards as it smashed into a huge pillar behind it, with a massive gaping hole forming in its body, which healed an instant later. What a troublesome creature! A chuckle slowly rang out as the members of the team appeared totally unharmed, with Satoru standing at the forefront of the team with fingers crossed and a small smile on his face. How do we take it down if it keeps regenerating? Himeno spoke as she summoned her ghost arm and readied herself for battle. It's not regenerating. It's rewinding time to restore its body to the original. The only way to win this is to take it out in one shot. Satoru furrowed his brows before flashing a glance at Oki. Die! The Eternity Devil roared out in rage, summoning giant spears from its own flesh, which shot towards the team. Satoru immediately took a step forward, gathering an immense amount of cursed energy within his body, before he stretched his palm forward. Boom! In a split second, space itself seemed to shatter like a mirror, while a huge slash swept out instantaneously, accompanied by a massive amount of force, which decimated the building itself. The Eternity Devil was immediately cleaved in two, while huge amounts of blood spurted out like a fountain. The team of young devil hunters moved in that moment. Taking advantage of the devil's predicament, Denji, Power, Oki, and Himeno bolted forward, each executing their own techniques, causing even further damage to the already wounded Eternity Devil. The devil rewound time once more and healed itself. Seeing the devil hunters close to it, an immense amount of energy burst out of its body like a shockwave, sending everyone flying while spitting blood. You dare to harm me? Die! With rage-filled eyes, a large amount of energy coalesced above the Eternity Devil into a massive energy sphere. In the same moment, a dozen massive spears materialized from within its body, with incredibly sharp and pointed ends aimed towards the group. In an instant, the two-pronged attack blasted towards the youths, with the massive energy sphere leaving a trail of destruction everywhere it passed, while the long spears seemed to rip through the air itself. Satoru moved in that instant, ready to materialize the infinity to protect them, when he felt a weird energy crash towards him in a split second. In the next moment, he swore he could have seen a sneer form on the faces of the Eternity Devil, as his body suddenly froze in time. Ha 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 ha. Shit! He immediately cursed in his mind, seeing the Eternity Devil laugh hysterically. It had most likely figured out his techniques and planned on singling him out to divide and conquer. The two-pronged attack, on the other hand, advanced with immense speed towards them, especially towards Satoru, bringing about destruction wherever it passed. Satoru! Denji roared out before he bolted forward, uncaring for his own life, leapt into the air, and used his own body as a shield, protecting Satoru from the onslaught, while Power used whatever was left of her blood energy to construct a massive dome to protect the others. Boom! A large explosion went off as multiple glass louvers shattered, along with the destruction of a massive part of the building itself. Even if I destroy my body, in the end it's all going to be worthwhile after I gobble you measly humans up like the worms you are. The Eternity Devil's hysterical laughter reverberated throughout the neighborhood. The dust settled, revealing the miserable states of the team of young devil hunters. Kobeni and Arai were unconscious, along with Power, who looked bloodied and badly injured. Oki and Himino were sprawled on the ground, their clothes disheveled, with blood flowing out of their noses and lips. Meanwhile, Denji and Satoru had it worse. Multiple spears pierced through both of their chests, and their bodies were conjoined to each other on their knees. Denji. Satoru opened his eyes a moment later, seeing the unconscious body bleeding out and resting on his chest unconscious. He sighed before he slowly moved his hand and snapped the spears, separating himself from his best friend, and stood up slowly. Satoru. Oki roared out, seeing his teammate seemingly walking to his death. Although they had their differences, he still trusted and had faith in his abilities, and as a leader he wasn't going to let his teammate be the one to sacrifice for the group. "It's all right. I got this." Satoru turned around and flashed a wide and bloody grin before continuing forward towards the Eternity Devil. "Ha ha ha ha. You are relentless, aren't you, puny human? Your measly control over space doesn't give you an edge over godly being like me with the power of time." The devil roared out before erupting in fierce and bloody laughter. "Sigh. I admit you're pretty troublesome and I was a bit overconfident. Hee. Didn't know your control over time had reached such a level." Satoru rubbed his head before flashing another bloody grin. "Ha ha ha ha. A puny human dares to boast in front of me. You're just like the other humans in my presence, only your power makes you stubborn and a bit strenuous to kill, like a cockroach." The Eternity Devil rambled on, looking down on Satoru as if he were an inferior being. "Oi, oi. You think you're some sort of a higher life form, but in my eyes, you're but a slightly troublesome worm." Satoru spoke with a wide grin, as his eyes glowed with immense amounts of pride. His body began to levitate slowly as he opened his arms wide, like some self-proclaimed messiah. "Before me, you're nothing. I am the true higher life form." The moment his words sounded, a deafening silence reverberated as the space around began to crack and shatter like mirrors, as if the void itself was acknowledging the presence and authority of a supreme god. In a split second, his body was encased in an immense amount of cursed energy as his hands began to move in tandem, as if he were stirring the waves of the ocean. Cursed technique amplification. Blue. The next second, space shattered before him as a small black dot materialized, a singularity created from an unnatural and extreme authority over the concept of space itself. Instantly, a massive attraction force burst out. Matter, mass and immense amounts of cursed energy began to pour into the singularity. Shockingly, the group of badly injured devil hunters seemed safe and protected by an invisible force, while the hotel itself seemed to collapse and be pulled into the singularity. In a flash, the small black dot had begun to churn as it enlarged and turned a bright blue shade while it absorbed immense amounts of mass and energy itself, becoming a large energy sphere. "Go!" With a command, it blasted forward with immense force, decimating everything in its path, while continuing towards the Eternity Devil with immense speed. The eyes on the faces of the Eternity Devil widened as it blasted out a massive beam of negative energy towards the incoming energy sphere. However, its attack did absolutely nothing and was instead absorbed by the blue energy sphere and became part of it. Boom! He. Oki and Himino leaned against a pillar, as Oki chuckled, seeing the overwhelmingly powerful attack from Satoru and the damage it caused. No wonder he didn't want to use the trump card from the get-go. Just imagine what would have happened to us if we were caught up in it. What a monster. Himino couldn't help but smile as her eye glanced towards the tall and awe-inspiring figure levitating in the sky like a deity. Several ambulances and Devil Hunter SUVs had pulled up outside the now destroyed Hotel Morino. In one of the ambulances, Denji, who was now conscious, was strapped to a stretcher, but a wide grin remained on his face while he looked towards the figure before him. "I'm glad you're okay, Satoru." He smiled and said before closing his eyes as he pulled into the ambulance. Meanwhile, Satoru only smiled and winked at him before turning around and walking to the rest of the team. Power had also been taken away for immediate treatment due to immense injuries, just like Denji. Currently, only Oki, Himino, Kobeni and Arai remain at the site, receiving treatment from several nurses while filing reports to the Devil Hunter superiors. "To think we almost died on this mission." Himino, who was currently getting treated due to the bruises on her hands and face, smiled and said, "I think I'm going to develop PTSD for hotels after this." Arai sighed as he sipped the coffee from a small cup in his hand. Who would have thought such destruction could be caused by one attack? I mean, if you guys hadn't told me, I would have never believed it. Arai continued, failing to notice Satoru walking towards him. He wasn't wrong, though. The so-called trump card from Satoru had caused immense destruction spanning a few kilometers. It felt both unreal and unnatural to them, who weren't used to seeing such battle casualties. Noticing the shadow of a figure walking towards them, he turned around and freaked out, seeing the handsomely sculpted face of the white-haired young man. Satoru only smiled and shrugged before looking at Oki and the rest. Satoru, I want to thank you for saving my life. Kobeni surprisingly stood up and bowed slightly, offering thanks with a rather firm gaze. It's all right. Satoru smiled and sat on an empty chair beside them while rubbing his eyes in exhaustion. He checked his pockets the next moment and picked up a white piece of cloth before he closed his eyes and blindfolded himself and heaved a sigh of relief. I think we all should celebrate after all the paperwork is done. What do you guys think? Himeno suggested with a small smile. It's a good idea, but I'm definitely not paying. Satoru wittingly said with a chuckle, which caused Himeno and Oki to roll their eyes. Come on. After receiving your first paycheck, it's only fair that you treat your teammates to some meat and alcohol. She insisted. You guys are rather supposed to flatter me with gifts for saving your asses back there. You know, if it wasn't for me and my awesome abilities, you would have been toast. Satoru argued back, a cocky smile plastered all over his face, while the others scrunched their noses in distaste. Stingy jerk. Himeno immediately walked away with a cold harumph, as Arai and Kobeni followed behind, leaving only him and Oki seated with smiles. You know, you're right. You did save our asses back there, and we owe you one. Oki bowed his head slightly, offering a sincere thank you to the one who saved their butts from the Eternity Devil. Don't mention it. Satoru smiled. Anyway, I recently thought of something. He said with a slightly concerned look. Have you guys ever tried grading the devils or classifying them? Oki raised an eyebrow at his question. Think about it. We could classify or grade the devils according to the sheer output of their negative energy. Grading the devils should allow the devil hunters to grasp the danger level of the devils they face. Satoru said, but Oki remained skeptical. Interesting proposition, Satoru. Satoru was about to continue when a voice rang out, which made him pause momentarily and turn around. Behind him, Makima walked towards them with both of her hands in her pockets, and a smile adorned on her face. Ms. Makima. Oki stood up immediately, despite his injuries, and bowed slightly, while Satoru remained seated and even yawned while scratching his non-existent beard. I'll consult with the upper echelons on your proposition. She smiled and sat down beside them and gestured for Oki to do the same. You saved the lives of your fellow devil hunters while at the same time executing the mission. Not bad. At least thanks to you, we didn't lose such talented hunters. She smiled and spoke, but the condescending look in her eyes was unmistakable, which caused Satoru to frown a bit. It's all right. He replied and crossed his legs, while raising his chin, with a smile, pride radiating right from within his core. Anyway, the association decided to increase the amount we promised to offer after completing the mission. She said, as Oki and Satoru glanced at her in surprise. Instead of the 5,000 we were going to offer you, now we're going to pay you 9,000 instead for the mission. She said and stood up smilingly. I'll leave both of you here. Oki returns to the HQ as soon as possible to file the mission report. See you next time. She waved at them before walking away with steady steps. Oi, Oki, how strong is Makima? Watching her figure disappear into the crowd, Satoru asked and glanced at Oki, who was currently in deep thought. I can't really gauge her strength, and I've only seen her in action once. Oki replied and reclined in his seat with a sigh. Compared to me, how strong is she? Satoru pressed on with another question. If it wasn't necessary, then he didn't want to become enemies with her. Not because he was afraid, although the sheer output of his negative energy outclassed her in both quality and quantity. Energy levels weren't the only deciding factors in a battle. On the surface she looked harmless and outgoing, but Satoru could sense the fierce and outright demanding aura that sometimes let out of her body uncontrollably. Well, compared to you, then even I don't know. I've seen you in action many times, but I have only seen her in action once, so I can't judge. Oki said, as his gaze peered into the deep blue sky. Fair enough. See you next time, Oki. Satoru smiled before walking into one of the SUVs and ordered the driver to take him back to the HQ. Tokyo, Devil Hunters HQ. GOJO Satoru. Makima sat in her office with a confused yet intrigued expression on her face while she read a report file on the table before her. He had single-handedly defeated the Eternity Devil, a being that should prove to be a challenge for the strongest Devil Hunters, and he had done it in one move. From the reports, Oki's exact words were, he conjured what looked like a black hole and turned it into a sort of energy sphere. From what she knew of him so far, Oki was no liar, especially since she had him under her control. Hence, his report was legit. A human able to manipulate space to such an extent was incredible yet disturbing at the same time, even for her. She might be able to stop him if they were to engage in fierce combat now, but what about a few years later? She couldn't get him under her control now due to that weird ability of his eyes to see energy and mass at the atomic level. Hence, there was only one thing to do. She would take extreme measures against him. She shook her head and pulled open a drawer on her desk and pulled out a file with a murderous smile plastered over her face. Meanwhile, in a training room, two youths were engaged in a heated brawl, sending punches and kicks flying towards each other at incredible speeds. The first figure was an extremely handsome youth with short silver hair, who wore a pair of dark-tinted circular sunglasses. His upper body was bare, showing off his slender and toned body packed with lean muscle, but he wore grey sweatpants and was barefooted. He had a smile on his face as he weaved and bobbed in between the terrifying combos unleashed from the other youth, as if he could see it coming. The other youth was a handsome youth dressed in a black sweatsuit. His slightly long dark hair was tied into a short ponytail, and his expression was serious. He moved at immense speed while unleashing various punch and kick combos, trying to take down his opponent. The youths clashed one more time, with their fists smashing into each other, as the dark-haired youth skidded backwards for a few meters and dropped to his knees while gasping for breath. You're pretty strong, Oki. The silver-haired youth extended a hand and lifted his partner to his feet while patting his shoulder. Don't try to make me feel better. I lost 5 fights in a row. Oki shook his head before he walked towards his water bottle and drank from it while taking a seat. I'm not joking, you're really strong. Satoru picked up his towel and bottle and sat beside Oki, speaking while taking small sips of freshly squeezed fruit juice from his bottle. You have transcended the limits of the physical body with nothing but pure effort and talent. The only reason why I'm able to win over you is because I have access to negative energy and can empower my body with it. Satoru flashed a small smile before speaking. In fact, as far as he could judge, Oki was probably the strongest amongst all the devil hunters he had seen so far. Although he was holding back a lot, being able to keep up with someone like him in hand-to-hand combat wasn't something most could do at the moment. I see. Although I have a question. Oki nodded and looked at him. Go ahead. Satoru gestured with a nod. Is it possible for a human apart from you to be able to manipulate negative energy or gain access to a technique of his own? He asked with a slightly expectant look. Let's see. Satoru placed his hand on his chin before descending into deep thought. Devils are born from negative energy, fear. And on the other hand, the fear that births devils originates from deep within the soul of man. And it's completely understandable, because fear and negative emotions make us who we are. They are the very foundations of the human civilization. Satoru completed his lecture with a smile. So technically, it should be possible for a human to use it since it's a part of us. Oki replied with a question. It's just a small theory, but I mean, it should be possible. The only problem is it should be concentrated enough for one to be able to grasp onto and materialize it. Satoru chuckled while Oki nodded. As for the technique, I'm not too sure, but who knows? Everything is possible, right? He shrugged with a slightly pensive look. Anyway, do you want to go for another round? I'll go easy on you. Satoru smiled and walked to the center of the training room before he got into a martial arts stance and gestured towards Oki. You better. Oki bolted forward with a small smile before he unleashed a flying kick toward Satoru. Smiling, Satoru crossed both arms before his chest and tanked the attack before he grabbed Oki's foot within a split second, spun him around and hurled him backwards with immense force. Oki flipped his body multiple times in the air and landed while skidding a few meters away. Before he could even react, Satoru appeared before him in an instant and unleashed a crazy 360-degree spinning kick, which pushed him back once more. The next moment, both of them rushed towards each other and were about to engage in a fierce session of close combat when a group of figures barged into the training room unannounced. "Oi, Oki, I have been searching for you since forever. Since when did you start hanging out with the jerk?" The person in the lead, Himino, said with a snarl, while sending a fierce glare at Satoru. "And why the hell are you guys training without me? I feel betrayed and hurt." Denji spoke with a dramatic expression, while Arai couldn't help but laugh. "Hold on. Is something going on between both of you that we are not aware of?" Himino suddenly covered her mouth with a widened eye, while Denji and Arai followed suit. Oki was speechless for a moment, while a trickle of sweat dripped down his cheek. "How did you guys find out? Oki and I are sweethearts now. Tell them, darling." Satoru decided to play along. He winked and placed his arm around Oki's shoulders and laughed. Oki felt a chill down his spine before he quickly shook off Satoru's arm. "There's nothing going on between us. Stop with the drama." Oki roared out and secretly wiped the drop of sweat off his cheek. "I'm heartbroken." Satoru placed his hand on his heart just like Denji did and playfully collapsed to the ground, as the others, including Power, couldn't help but laugh. "I said enough." Oki roared out, while gritting his teeth, as the others laughed even more. Satoru laughed the hardest, seeing the embarrassment on Oki's face. "Fine. Fine. We'll stop teasing you." Himino wiped a tear from her eye and said, giggling in between her words, "Anyway, we're going out for a couple of drinks and wondered if you wanted to join us." Himino said while casting a glare at Satoru, who winked at her. "Who's paying?" Satoru playfully said, while Himeno's glare intensified. "It's none of your business, stingy jerk. Now are you coming or not?" She yelled at both of them. "Fine, fine. Just give me a moment to freshen up," Satoru said and walked away with his towel and water bottle. "Oh, I forgot. Oki darling, would you like to join me in the bathroom?" Satoru playfully winked at Oki, who gritted his teeth in frustration as the others burst out in laughter once more. "Stop laughing, all of you." He stood up, picked up his towel and bottle and stormed out angrily. Within a small drinking bar, multiple figures could be seen sitting at a table drinking and making merry, with excited expressions. The cruel reality of the universe was that humanity was still at the very bottom of the food chain and would soon probably face an extinction crisis. However, the frontline fighters and leaders of humanity against such a terrible fate were a bunch of young men and women who had given their lives, their families, and everything they possessed to choose the higher calling and become devil exterminators. After several hard days of work, the most important thing these youths needed was rest and relaxation. "Oi! Oi! Everyone! I want us to make a toast." As they drank and ate, a semi-drunk beautiful young woman with an eye patch hit a spoon on the glass of beer before her and spoke at the top of her lungs, drawing attention to herself. "What are we toasting to, Senior Himino?" A youth with blonde hair dressed in an all-black suit spoke out while looking at the eye patch girl. "I want us to make a toast to the stingy jerk who refused to invite us out to have a drink even with all the money he makes." The moment her words sounded, all eyes shifted onto the quiet silver-haired youth in dark circular glasses who was calmly seated at the end of the table while slowly feasting on the plate full of meat before him and the soda in his hand. "Thank you very much, Himino, that warms my heart." He placed his hand on his chest and smiled sarcastically as the others laughed. "Toast to the stingy jerk who saved our lives yesterday." Cheers! Everyone cheered at the table and downed a glass of beer before they clapped in excitement. "So you're the man of the moment. Hey, how does that feel?" Sitting before the silver-haired youth was a beautiful young woman with slightly long pink hair. Her golden eyes peered deep into his soul as she flashed him a smile and asked, "This isn't my moment. It's everyone's." A little bit of enjoyment and relaxation isn't a bad thing after all. Who knows what the future holds, right, Makima? The silver-haired youth took a bite of the roasted pork on his chopstick and spoke while looking at his teammates happily dancing and making merry. Hearing her name being called so informally, the pink-haired beauty scrunched her eyebrows for a moment before she flashed her signature smile. I notice you're not drinking alcohol, unlike the others. I'm guessing it has something to do with an ability of yours, no? She said while resting her cheek on her fist. Well, first of all, I don't drink alcohol. It's disgusting. And like I said, it's everyone's moment to have a good time, but anything is possible. He replied. You're right. It would be disastrous if a powerful devil were to show up here. You have the mindset of a true hero. She smiled, but the crafty and condescending look in her eyes was apparent. PFFFTTT. A hero? What's that? The silver-haired youth laughed. Gojo Satoru was no hero. He might be a good brother who was willing to risk his life to save his brothers us all the time, but that was it. He wasn't one to put his life at risk to save people he did not even know. Although he wasn't one to harm innocent people either. He cared for himself, his own interests and Denji. So tell me something, Gojo Satoru. What is your dream? She asked and took a sip of her beer, while Satoru happily ate his roasted pork. My dream? Why don't you humor me, Makima? Tell me yours first. He continued eating and spoke without even sparing her a glance. I want to save humanity from the plague of devils. She spoke briefly and looked at him only for him to laugh out once more. You're either lying or you're delusional. A devil will forever be a devil, no matter how many times it interacts with humans. I find it really funny that a devil wants to rid the world of her own kind. He laughed and wiped his eyes of tears and continued. Fine. Say you managed to somehow accomplish that goal. What next? Enslave all of humanity. Become a dictator. Satoru lowered his glasses as his 6 eyes peered into Makima's. At this point, she wasn't smiling anymore, and beneath her expressionless visage, Satoru could detect a hint of malice, bloodlust, and murderous intent. Let me make something crystal clear to you, Makima. I don't care whether you want to turn the world into a devil farm or whatever. You can do whatever you want, as long as you don't get in my way or harm anyone I know. Because once you do, even if I have to fight against the entire world just to get my hands on you, I promise, I will end you myself. Is that a threat? Instantly, the whole bar turned silent, as all eyes turned to the 2 figures who were boldly facing off against each other. Makima sat uncaringly, with her cheek resting on her fist. Her eyes gleamed with murderous intent as she glared at the figure before her, who was seated with his legs crossed, fingers interlocked, and with a cocky smile. A threat? No, no. How could I threaten my superior? It's just a word of caution and hopefully, things wouldn't escalate to such a point. Everyone at the bar couldn't help but shiver, hearing Satoru's cocky reply. Even Himino, who didn't like Makima, was terrified for Satoru. Although she hadn't seen her in action, at least she had heard stories and tales of Makima. Oki raised an eyebrow, while Denji looked to be in a dilemma. On one hand was the girl he liked at the moment, and on the other was a brother figure to him. After a few seconds, Makima broke eye contact and picked up her overcoat. I would have loved to continue this conversation, but unfortunately, I can't stay any longer. I'll pay on my way out. She smiled before she flashed everyone a gentle smile, not forgetting to glance at Satoru's figure before leaving. Bro. What the hell was that about? The first to blurt out in dissatisfaction was none other than Denji, who instantly came over and sat on Makima's seat. Oh my. You might be a stingy jerk, but tonight you increased my favorability point about you to 5 stars. Should I give you a kiss? Himino smiled seductively, but Satoru didn't even glance at her nor at Denji. I guess from now on, my stay in this place is going to be anything but peaceful. Satoru smiled and downed his drink in one go. Meanwhile, inside a luxurious car moving on a highway, Makima was calmly seated in the back, with her eyes fixated outside the glass window while in deep thought. Gojo Satoru. She calmly whistled out his name as her eyes turned murderous. What an interesting fellow. With him standing in my way, my goal and dream might not be manifest. She thought as she remembered his calm and cocky smile and those eyes of his, which were still ingrained in her memory. A pair of eyes that even she had to be wary of. Since you want to play, let's play. She let out a small laugh as the car drove off, speeding along the highway. Thank you for the information. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. A young man dressed in a black suit bowed respectfully to an old woman within a small neighborhood before turning around and walking away with the petite young girl beside him. Bang! Watching the backs of the two young devil hunters, a murderous light appeared in the eyes of the old woman before she stealthily picked up a small gun and fired multiple times. This is Team C, Phase 2 of Mission Accomplished. Within an alley, two figures armed with pistols stood over the dead bodies of about 3 young men. The first figure was a middle-aged man dressed who held a cigarette to his lips. He picked up a walkie-talkie and made a report before leaving swiftly with his partner. Kyoto Train Station. At a train station in Kyoto, several figures dressed in suits were calmly waiting to receive an important guest. After a few minutes of waiting, the train finally arrived, and a beautiful young woman who was slightly disheveled and bloody walked out with a serene expression. Ms. Makima. What happened? You're hurt. The figures in suits instantly rushed towards her with worried expressions, seeing her blooded figure. Don't worry. I'm fine. It's not my blood. She smiled and reassured. Ms. Makima, we just received a call that Special Division 1, 2, 3, and 4 have been ambushed by multiple gunmen. One of the figures, a young man with spiky hair and a scar on his nose and cheek, spoke with a frown. I see. Rent out a shrine, one with the highest altitudes. Call the Prime Minister and tell him I need about 15 inmates on death row, and lastly, someone get me a change of clothes. She spoke and walked away, as the rest of the group followed behind her and listened to her orders. Meanwhile, in a small restaurant, multiple figures were seated at a table, having breakfast, as they argued, joked, and laughed with one another. Oi, Satoru. What happened between you and Makima yesterday? Suddenly a young man dressed in a shirt with rolled-up sleeves who had blonde hair spoke with a snarl as he glanced at another youth with silver hair and glasses who sat a few meters away from him. Why do you keep asking, Denji? I said nothing happened. The silver-haired youth rubbed his temples in exasperation as he spoke with an exhausted sigh. You're lying. I've never seen that bitch act in such a manner. You must have done something to anger her. I'm knows right. I can still feel chills all over my body when I recall those murderous eyes of hers. Himino said, and Power backed her up while shivering in her seat. I only asked her to increase my salary by a notch, and she got all murderous on me. Who knew your boss was so petty? Satoru ended his reply with a cold harumph, as the others raised their eyebrows. Only Denji seemed to really accept the response, as he went back to eating. Meanwhile, Satoru couldn't help but raise an eyebrow, seeing the serious look Oki was giving him. I can't believe you can eat the ramen here. It tastes freaking terrible. Suddenly, a man sitting at a table across from theirs grumbled, as everyone except Satoru turned their attention towards him. He had short dark hair, with average looks. The only thing that was incredibly glaring about him was his sideburns and an even bigger temper. Who are you? It tastes fine to me. Denji and Power replied at the same time, while the others remained quiet and observant. I won't bother arguing with fools who can't even judge the quality of flavors. He spoke as a frown appeared on Oki's face. My grandfather was the kindest man in the world. He bought me food at expensive restaurants and gave me everything I ever wanted. I'm told he only killed a bunch of women and children. People like him are a necessary evil. He was a yakuza with principles. He continued to speak and slowly stood up. He was a man who everyone loved. And I'm sure you did too, didn't you, Denji? He walked to them and took out a picture of an old man and a young boy before showing it to the team. What do you mean? Denji instantly frowned as the others tensed up. The gun devil says it wants your heart. He calmly spoke before pulling out a pistol and firing multiple shots, and Himino, Oki, and Satoru wanted to take out the humans first. However, a few inches away from the foreheads of the targets, the bullets halted in their paths. Oki and Himino instantly let out a breath, seeing the bullet only a few inches from their foreheads. No wonder you looked familiar. Long time no see. Suddenly, Satoru, who had been quiet all this while, turned around and flashed a smile at the dumbfounded man. It's you, Satoru. He immediately took a step back in fear, seeing the handsome face smiling at him. The one and only. Satoru chuckled, and power rushed forwards in an instant before burying her fist into his face, hurling him right through the building, accompanied by an explosion of shockwaves and gusts of wind. Ooh! He landed in the middle of the road, forming a small crater beneath him, and groaned in pain. Oi! You're getting your ass kicked, aren't you? A young woman in a pink sweater, along with several other men, walked towards him and helped him up. Oi! Suddenly they heard a chuckle and turned around only to see Satoru levitating in the air before them. We have to run now. The man with the sideburns roared out and was about to leave when the young girl grabbed him and hit him on the head. Have you forgotten that you are not a normal human anymore? She spoke while examining Satoru, who was floating before them. Who is he anyway? She asked as the man instantly pulled off his right arm and transformed into a devil with 2 long katanas for arms and another one sticking out of his forehead. Back then, when I lived with my grandfather, we called him the Yakuza Nightmare. He single-handedly killed about 100 of our men with his bare hands just for beating up that fool Denji. The man who had just transformed into what looked like a katana devil roared out while he kept his gaze on Satoru's figure. Quite impressive. But here's your chance to enact revenge. Make it quick. The young girl carkily patted the katana devil's shoulder and retreated. You know, back then, I did promise you that I was going to kill you the next time we met. No. Satoru cracked his fists and landed on the ground gently while a cocky smile hung on his face. And before you die, you should know that the culprit for your grandfather's murder wasn't Denji, but me. Satoru laughed as he watched the katana devil rush towards him in immense anger. We should go help Satoru. Denji and the rest of the team were currently engaged in a battle with the gunman. He can handle this on his own. You need to focus on the fight ahead. Himino slapped some sense into him while they hid, protecting themselves from the rain of bullets directed towards them. Bang! A silver-haired youth gently lowered his glasses and examined a devil whose body was currently sprawled on the ground after being hurled through multiple buildings with immense force. You're tenacious. He calmly spoke while still looking at the figure of the katana devil, who was slowly rising from the rubble with a bloody figure. Die! The katana devil roared out once more before he bolted forward at immense speeds, leapt into the sky and slashed his katanas towards the silver-haired youth. Sigh. You never learn, do you? The youth sighed before he bolted forward at immense speeds. It was as if space itself was propelling his body forward, as he traversed the seemingly long distance with a step and leapt into the air as well. With but a simple glance from his piercing blue eyes, the katana devil was pulled towards him as if he were a magnet by an attractive force as the youth grabbed him by the neck and smashed his figure into the ground with an incredible amount of force, which shattered the ground, forming a large crater. Shit! We gotta help the boss. Multiple armed figures began rushing towards the silver-haired youth armed with guns and began firing on sight. Boom! However, the bullets stopped right before him, as if an invisible wall protected his body, and with another glance, an immense attractive force crashed into their bodies. Their frail bodies immediately exploded on contact, as a massive shockwave erupted, destroying a building in the process. The silver-haired youth smiled seeing the result of his attack, but he instantly bent over and dodged a slash from a katana, as if he had eyes on the back of his head. I'm going to have my revenge today, even if it's the last thing I do. The katana devil roared in fury before he got into a stance akin to an experienced samurai warrior about to draw his sword and unleash a powerful attack. Oh! Satoru raised an eyebrow and looked on with interest. If you are able to surprise me with this attack, I'll spare you. He smiled and calmly placed his hands in his pockets, waiting for the enemy to unleash the attack. What sort of devil hunter is he? Why did I have no information of someone as strong as him? The girl from before who had retreated into the shadows watched Satoru's impressive show-off with a little bit of shock on her face. Normally she wasn't one to get easily impressed, but after watching his exploits, she had no choice but to rate him at the very top of her list, maybe even at the level of someone like Makima herself. I'm still waiting for the attack. Satoru rolled his eyes impatiently, seeing the impressive amounts of negative energy the Katana Devil was accumulating. Harg! The Katana Devil roared out before he vanished with but a simple step forward. Whoosh! Boom! Multiple gusts of wind exploded from the point of contact, followed by a large explosion, which caused a mushroom cloud of dust to rise, like the remnants of a nuclear explosion. Ha 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 ha. I finally have my revenge. Grandfather, I have finally avenged you. The dust settled after a few seconds only to reveal the Katana Devil laughing victoriously. It's too early to be celebrating, don't you think so? Suddenly a shackle resounded, before he turned around only to see Satoru standing in the same place he had been standing from before, only this time, a large crater had formed under his feet. You! How are you still alive? The Katana Devil panicked instantly, seeing the seemingly dead opponent alive and well. It was as if the attack hadn't even touched the hem of his clothes, and the cocky smile and awe-inspiring demeanor made him look untouchable. Your attack wasn't bad, but unfortunately, your movements couldn't escape my eyes. Satoru had a carefree smile as he lectured. You! The Katana Devil instantly retreated, wanting to escape the clutches of the silver-haired youth, who currently resembled death itself in his eyes. You want to escape? Not this time. Satoru chuckled, lifted two fingers like a claw and swiftly waved them. Bang! The next moment, a massive gash swept out as the legs of the Katana Devil were cleaved off neatly, along with a building nearby, as blood gushed out in torrents. Please! No! Stay away! The Katana Devil roared out in pain as it tried its best to crawl away from the seemingly devilish figure who was slowly walking towards him. I did promise to kill you, didn't I? If I go back on my word, then what sort of a human am I? Satoru couldn't help but laugh, seeing the miserable state of the Katana Devil. No! I gotta help Katana out. If he dies, everything would go haywire. The girl in the pink hoodie instantly grimaced before crossing her fingers. Snake! She roared out as a massive serpentine creature burst out of her shadows and shot towards Satoru, who was calmly walking towards the Katana Devil. Please! Spare me! The Katana Devil kept roaring out in fear and instantly reverted to his human form. His face was wet with tears and his face was morphed with terror. Satoru calmly walked forward with his hands in his pockets and stood a few meters away from the man. Stretching forth his palm, space began to distort, like shattered mirrors, but right as he was about to fire an attack, he extended his arm towards his left. You're in my way. The next moment, a round blue energy sphere, the size of a basketball, materialized along with the distorted space and blasted towards the large serpentine creature, who was only a few meters away from Satoru's figure with jaws wide open, ready to swallow him whole. Boom! A massive explosion set off in a moment, as multiple buildings exploded or crumbled due to the immense amount of force from that one single attack. Hair? The young girl couldn't help but gawk in surprise while a hint of fear materialized in her eyes. Her contracted devil, the Snake Devil, a powerful devil, at least in her opinion, had been obliterated in a single attack from the silver-haired youth. The only remnants left of it were the bloody stains that were slashed all over the ground. If you want to attack, don't hide in the shadows. Satoru spoke and instantly looked towards a certain building. Instantly the pink-haired girl took a step backwards with a shiver, seeing as how he had been able to pinpoint her accurate distance even with such a distance between them. She immediately made a run for it, leaving the rest of the men and everyone else and escaping for her own life. Now where were we? Satoru turned to the man in front of him with a sadistic smile, and just as he was about to obliterate him, a surge of negative energy out of nowhere crashed into the man's body, and his body exploded, creating a bloody mess. What the? Satoru was glad he had used infinity on time, or else he would have been splashed with blood and intestines. Suddenly around the battlefield, all the men holding onto guns were instantly turned into ground paste, accompanied by massive surges of negative energy. Satoru! What the hell is going on? The team instantly regrouped, seeing the exploded body parts around them, as they wondered whether the attacker was a friend or enemy. This energy, Makima. Satoru scrunched his eyebrows and instantly used infinity, feeling the negative energy instantly crash towards him. However, a few meters away from the infinity, it disappeared like it was never there, leaving only a massive crater beneath his feet. So this is how you want to play, Makima, he thought, before he burst into a fit of laughter, as the others looked on in surprise and frowned. Kyoto Shrine. Meanwhile, the attacker, who was none other than Makima, stood on the compound of a shrine, and kneeling before her was a middle-aged man who was tied up with his eyes bandaged, who was about to join his comrades who had been killed in what looked like a ritual. Her hands were interlocked into an intricate hand seal, and the devil hunters behind her all had blindfolds on. I could eliminate you now if I wanted to, but that would create suspicion and might cause a few hindrances here and there. Consider yourself lucky, Gojo Satoru. She slowly let go of both hands and turned around, leaving the man wondering what was wrong. I'm done. You can take off your blindfolds now. She spoke and looked at the devil hunters, who took off their blindfolds instantly with their clothes drenched in sweat. Get rid of the dead bodies and get everything else ready, she said before walking away calmly. Tokyo, Devil Hunters HQ. A few days after the attack, the Devil Hunters HQ was bustling and lively, with every devil hunter under immense stress and working under pressure. Within the main office of the head of the Public Safety Division, several figures were seated on couches, in a somber atmosphere, with melancholic looks written all over their faces. Right before them was a pink-haired beauty dressed in a two-piece suit with an overcoat, sitting behind a desk, whose eyes kept glancing towards a silver-haired youth wearing a blindfold. This was an attack directed specifically towards the special divisions, and from your reports, it seems the perpetrators were actually after you, Denji, or more specifically, your heart. After a few minutes of silence, Makima was the first to voice out her thoughts, as the others listened. We lost so many teammates this time. Himino blurted out with a sigh and patted Kobini's back while the petite girl cried her heart out. Her teammate and close friend, Arai, had been shot full of bullets right before her eyes in an attempt to protect her. These past few days had been traumatizing, especially for her. But why does the gun devil want Denji's heart? Oki asked and looked at Makima expectantly. Even I am oblivious to your question, Oki. There were no witnesses, and no Yakuza member left alive. The only information we have now is the identity of the girl and the Katana devil. Makima replied, while placing her cheek on her fist in a carefree manner, as if the fact that dozens of the Special Division devil hunters didn't matter to her one bit. During our childhood, Denji and I lived in a neighborhood that was run by the Yakuza. They were filthy bastards who would go as far as selling their souls for wealth and power. Satoru, who had been quiet all this while, suddenly spoke up, drawing the attention of even Makima herself. In the past, the grandfather of the Katana guy sold the souls of some of his men to the zombie devil and caused the incident that made Denji what he is now. Maybe his grandson decided to follow in his footsteps and pledge allegiance to the gun devil in exchange for ammunition and money, and in return they were to retrieve Denji's heart or whatever. Everyone nodded at his words, seeing as it made sense at the very least. At least with this information in mind, they had a starting point for their investigation. Anyway, I've decided on a new course of action for the Special Division. Makima's words instantly got everyone on alert except Satoru, who was holding himself back from blasting her through the building with an attack for the little stunt she pulled back then. Not that he couldn't, but at the very least in a full-blown war between the two of them, he wasn't sure someone as crafty as her wasn't going to hold Denji or any of his teammates hostage. At the very least, when things went wrong, he would be able to protect himself. But what about Denji and his teammates, who he had grown attached to? On the other hand, he didn't know the full extent of her abilities and plans and planned on keeping an eye on her for the meantime. Why did you mean Ms. Makima? Oki asked with a small frown on his face, while Denji and Power lifted their eyebrows. First of all, I created the Special Division groups to be the backbone of the Public Safety Bureau, but it's not serving its purpose as intended. In other words, she created the Special Divisions to be the dogs of the government. What a nice way to put it. Satoru couldn't help but chuckle. There have been too many losses that need to be accounted for, and to ensure that these things desist from occurring. At this point, her voice was seemingly accompanied by an ominous tone, sending shivers down the spines of Oki, Power, Himino, Kobini, and even Denji. I've decided to groom you to become stronger. She ended her words with a smile, and the others couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. Denji and Power were the most relieved, since serving under someone like Makima was like a guillotine looming over their heads. One wrong move from them, and they were toast. For Oki, Himeno, and Kobini, I've decided it's time for you to get contracts with even more powerful devils to enhance your strengths even further. For Denji and Power, I've put in a special request from the higher-ups to have one of the very best devil hunters groom you. Also, I'll be increasing the roster of the special division groups to replace the deceased hunters. She smiled and closed the small file on her table and took out another file from her drawer. As for you, Satoru, the higher-ups have ordered me to personally grant you this mission. She smiled and took out a white sheet from the file and handed it over to him. Recent sightings in North Korea have located multiple devils on the loose, all believed to have swallowed multiple pieces of the gun devil's flesh. Reward, $10,000. She said, as Satoru read through the files with a glance. In other words, you want me to go to North Korea to go fight off a horde of devils for $10,000? He asked with a contemplating expression. Yes, and not only are you supposed to finish them off, but you are also to retreat as much of the gun devil's flesh as you can, for even more bonuses. She spoke. I see. Satoru nodded. There was nothing for him to do here other than sit around and train all day. Why not go out there, kill some devils and make some more money? He also speculated that it was all a part of Makima's schemes to divide and conquer. Maybe she wanted to single him out, and when he was alone out there, she would get him assassinated or even get the job done herself and then fake his death. It might have been impossible for someone else, but for someone as scheming as her, there was nothing she wouldn't do to achieve her goals. Fine. I agree. I mean, why not? He shrugged and reclined in his seat, ignoring the cruel look in her eyes. But, at the very least, I want a first-class flight to North Korea, a booked hotel at one of their best hotels, though I doubt if they even have one, and some cash. Satoru spoke after a bit of thought, while Makima thought for a moment and nodded. I agree to all of your conditions, but I'll have to have someone join you on the mission in case of anything. She nodded. Cool. When it's time to leave, just let me know. He then stood up, patted his clothes and walked out nonchalantly. Bang! Bang! Within a training room, a shirtless, silver-haired youth was fiercely throwing some sick punch-kick combos at a punching bag. His eyes were blindfolded, and his knuckles were taped. His slim figure was packed with lean muscle, and his visage could only be described as incredibly handsome. Even after reaching what could be said to be the pinnacle of mortal strength with just his physical body and reaching a nigh untouchable and unbeatable level of strength in this world, this young man had still never given up on his work ethic. Call it a waste of time, but deep down inside of that youth was a fire that burned and the zeal to strive for perfection and to be the best. After a few minutes of continuous training, he unleashed a spinning back kick, which hurled the punching bag flying to the other end of the training room like a meteor. He took a deep breath and picked up a towel and a blue bottle before he downed its contents quickly and wiped himself off of the sweat. He sighed after letting his mind wander through thoughts before taking a seat on a stone slab. After learning blue, my progress with the Limitless has probably reached another bottleneck. The next stage is to master reverse cursed technique in order to be able to use red. But the thing is, I've been trying to go according to what was written, but it's just not working. He thought for a while and decided to try his luck once more. He slowly took off the blindfold, revealing a pair of piercing azure gem-like eyes, and adjusted his breath for a moment. Multiply negative with negative. Multiply negative with negative. He calmed himself and began to slowly gather negative energy within his palms. The reverse cursed technique was a technique that allowed one to create positive energy by just multiplying negative energy with negative energy. Multiply negative with negative. Gathering one portion of negative energy on his right palm and another on his left, he slowly brought them together, trying to get the reddish flame-like energy to multiply itself. Bang! The next moment, the energy between his palms exploded, hurling him into a pillar as his body slowly fell to the ground. Shit! He sat up and cursed before rubbing his shoulders, which were currently in pain. Multiply negative by negative. Multiply negative by negative. He slowly calmed himself and tried repeating the process, trying to hypnotize himself with the chants, but inevitably, it exploded in his face once more, sending him flying again. Multiply negative by negative. What does that even mean? He roared in confusion and lay on his back with a sigh. After failing for probably the gazillionth time, he was starting to feel exhausted. According to the Jujutsu Kaisen anime, or from what he watched at least, he learned that reverse cursed technique was just multiplying negative energy by itself to create positive energy. As for how you were to multiply a form of energy by itself, he didn't know, or whether a catalyst was needed, or whether the amount of energy he needed had to be in a certain amount, he had no idea, or whether said energy had to be in two different proportions in order to multiply. All these were variables that should be considered when trying something nigh impossible, such as trying to multiply a form of energy by itself. It wasn't called one of the most advanced techniques in the Jujutsu Kaisen franchise for nothing. At the very least, he trusted that since some characters had been able to learn the technique, there was hope for him to learn it as well. The only problem was he didn't know how long it would take, or whether he needed to achieve another enlightenment, or whether he would have to touch on the core of cursed energy itself. Man, I should have watched and read everything there was to know about the Jujutsu Kaisen universe before dying. He face-palmed and sighed, but a small smile formed on his face as he remembered something. At the very least, I've made some progress on instant teleportation. He laughed and interlocked his fingers in an intricate seal. Okay. Let's see if I can bring the theory into reality. I hope this doesn't turn into another RCT moment for me. He chuckled to himself and steadied the rhythm of his breath. Instant teleportation is quite complex in its own right, although having a basic understanding of the limitless and six eyes made it a bit less strenuous. It was a simple technique that involved collapsing the space between himself and his destination using negative energy, neutralizing the very concept of distance. In other words, teleporting according to Limitless worked in the same way as Blue, which involved spatial distortion. Even through his research, he found out that, even in reality, when space-time is distorted, a gravitational pull manifests, which begins to pull objects into itself to try to mend the distorted void. Teleportation, according to Limitless, wasn't a form of instant movement, but by warping space, the very concept of distance becomes neutralized, creating the illusion of instantaneous movement. Okay, here it goes. He took a deep breath, materialized huge amounts of cursed energy, and just as he was about to execute the technique, he stopped and clapped himself on the head. How could I forget a destination? Seriously, Satoru, what the hell is wrong with you? He sighed and shook his head before he interlocked his fingers once more, materialized massive amounts of cursed energy, and this time, he used the six eyes to pinpoint a destination, which was his bedroom. Clap. Bang. The sound of his palms hitting each other reverberated as his body disappeared in a split second, leaving only the floor where he previously sat cratered. Did it? Whoa. It freaking worked. Ha 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 ha. Slowly opening his eyes, he found himself on top of his bed, as he laughed without reservation. Let's do it again. He smiled and interlocked his fingers and clapped his palms once more, and his body mysteriously disappeared and reappeared in his bathroom. From the bathroom to the living room to the training room, back to the bathroom, and then to the bedroom. He practiced his newly formed ability until he was mentally exhausted. BZZZT. BZZZT. After a few moments, his phone, which silently lay on the table beside his bed, began to vibrate as he took it and picked up the incoming call. Satoru, where have you been? I've called you several times now, but no answer. Oki's voice resounded on the other side as he listened with a bored expression. What do you want? He said with a tired voice. Ms. Makima has requested your presence to debrief you on the mission. Your partner is already in, and did you forget that you have a mission tomorrow? Satoru couldn't help but sigh, unwilling to listen to Oki's rants, as he ended the call swiftly and teleported to the bathroom. Within Makima's office, a handsome youth dressed in a three-piece suit with long blonde hair sat on the couch along with Oki. His face was expressionless, and the most peculiar thing about him was the pair of white fluffy wings that grew on his back. Makima sat opposite them, going through some paperwork when she felt a familiar negative energy source reappear out of nowhere in front of her office. Oh. She couldn't help but raise an eyebrow as she watched the silver-haired youth with a white blindfold, dressed in his signature long-neck jacket, trousers, and shoes, walk in an arrogant fashion without even knocking. Satoru sat on a different couch, while his gaze peered towards the blonde-haired youth with the wings for mere seconds before attracting his gaze. "You're late." Makima raised an eyebrow, while he shrugged. "I had an emergency. You know, my, dog ate my, keys." "But you don't have a dog." Oki was quick to sell out, as Satoru glanced at him and rolled his eyes under his blindfold. "Good point." He smiled a moment later, as Oki sighed and shook his head. "Anyway, Satoru, this is your partner, the Angel Devil. But you can call him Angel." She introduced them, as Satoru nodded towards the silent youth with the wings. "So you're the Angel Devil, and your name is Angel?" he asked as the youth nodded. "Interesting."
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.